If you've ever felt watched walking past classroom windows after dark, this one's for you. 3 true school horror stories: a locked room that answers roll call, a stairwell that counts wrong, and a custodian who never clocks out. Let's keep it simple. 3 real moments, not loud, but sticky. Listen first, look second. Drop the timestamp that finds you. If you want more like this, subscribe at the end. Lights down. The building had learned the drill before the people did. It knew how a day tightens when a voice on the intercom goes flat and careful. It knew the way shades fall like quiet eyelids and the way hinges try not to speak. Lincoln High had done this enough times that the room dust understood where to land and wait. By late afternoon, the signal released them. Locks unclicked, latches lifted. Students moved like water finding its old riverbed. Teachers counted, called, waved a last hand down a row. Then the daylight slid from yellow to that thin grey you only get in wet months, and the school began to empty into evening, the kind of evening that hums more than it talks. On the second floor, the main hall ran long and straight, the way a bowling lane runs when nobody's put the pins back yet. The fluorescents settled into their soft, electric insect sound. Trophy glass kept its careful shine. A brass wall bell, old style, sat above room 214, shallow bowl, small hammer under a loop of masking tape that someone, years back, had written on in block letters, Discon. Alma Cruz pushed a cart that knew every seam between every tile. She didn't rush. Night work never rewarded rushing. She was the kind of custodian who made a building feel seen. People said she had a good ear, but it was more than that. She had the sense for what didn't belong. The drill days sharpened that sense. Paper found corners it didn't earn. Chairs drifted inches off their marks. She returned each thing without making a speech about it. That was her style. Quiet, thorough, companionable. Mr. Haney, the watchman, walked below on the first floor with the keys in his pocket doing their small metronome. He talked to boilers like they were old co-workers. The building liked him for that. He believed in measurements and doors that shut the way doors were meant to. When you get a man like that on your night staff, a school sleeps better. Outside, a thin spring rain began to write on the windows. It didn't plead to be noticed, but if you listened, you could hear how it checked each pane, one by one, like a nurse at midnight. In the principal's office, the clock put its hands against 9:38. In the payphone alcove, the coiled cord tucked itself as if it could take a small nap. At 9:41 p.m., the bell above room 214 rang. Not the warm chime the newer PA could throw through the ceiling. Not a hiccup from a dirty contact. A single, clean strike, the sound a bell makes when something has asked it a yes or no question, and it has chosen yes. Alma felt her ribs stop first. Then she heard it, the ring, the honest fade, the way it touched the locker doors and came back thinner. Her cart rolled 2 inches and tapped her hip, reminding her where she was. She looked up at the taped hammer. The tape hadn't moved. It wore dust like fine fur. She reached her hand toward it, not touching, only placing her palm under the bowl, the way you might place a palm under a bird to show it you were not a threat. Downstairs, Mr. Haney didn't catch the sound. The boilers were busy making their own small weather. That was all right. The building would tell him in another way. Alma kept 2 pencils, one for paper, one for skin. She used the second now, wrote 9:41 across the heel of her left hand, lifted her eyes to the stairwell door, and watched. The maglock panel blinked once and offered a red line of tiny characters, neat as stitchwork. 2139 open, no badge. She pressed the scroll button, slow as if being polite might coax more truth from it. Another line waited in order, patient and wrong the same way. 2140 closed, no badge. She read both again, open, close, no badge, and felt that sideways sensation a person gets when a drawer you know you locked is resting open by a finger's width. She breathed once, shallow, once, deeper. Then she radioed down. "Haney, you up?" Static gave a polite cough and let his voice through. "Boiler's good," he said, then caught how her silence shaped a space. "What do you need?" "Just meet me on 2, she said. By 2:14, they stood under the bell together in the kind of hush people choose when the regular words feel like they'll break something thin and important. He tapped the edge of the tape with the corner of a key. Nothing. He tipped his head, measuring the distance between ordinary and not quite. "Disconnected," he said, because repeating the right word makes a person feel like the world has been notified. She showed him her palm. He nodded. 941 already looked like a tattoo of a number you could build a habit around. Then she pointed to the panel, the red lines waiting like 2 small flags left out overnight. He didn't argue with the machine. He respected paper and its cousins. He pressed the button again, hoping the third press, like saying a name 3 times, might make a new line appear. It did not. 10 o'clock we check this, he said, a practical promise you can rest a hallway on. If it rings again, we write the line as it happened. If it doesn't, we write that too. They walked their separate routes, met again at 10, and found the ordinary doing its job. The panel slept without new ink. The bell kept its silence like it had picked it on purpose. Alma made the log entry, straight letters, small date. She wedged the book between a vending machine refill and a mop head request, because true things rarely get their own shelf at first. At home, hours later, she washed dishes and watched the pencil soften on her skin but not disappear. She didn't tell her daughter, she didn't tell her sister. She told the building, in the oldest language a place understands. She came back on time the next day and kept faith with her list. That's how you say, "I'm listening." The next Thursday, the bell would ring again. The hallway already knew this, the way a corridor knows its own echoes. People would catch up soon. The week unrolled straight as butcher paper. Lessons, bells that aren't bells, buses that leave their diesel in the air, like a sentence that can't decide how to end. By Thursday, the building had put its shoulders where they belonged. It did not look different. It was. Alma checked the work orders before her shift. "Replace bulbs, science corridor," typed neat. A photocopy of an older page lay stapled to the stack, the 1979 note that said, with a kind of bureaucratic certainty, "Bellbank removed 3/12/79. She touched the staple, a small habit, the way some people touch a lucky coin. Paper has presence. It can hold a minute when you can't. Mr. Haney cleaned his glasses at dinner, an unconscious tell. He said nothing about bells or panels. He liked to meet a thing with a fresh, measured face, but he catalogued his plan while the sports news murmured, "Be under the stairwell for the panel at 9:38, give himself a lane of sight, put his body where a person would have to pass if the door tried its trick." Alma made her own plan with the quiet efficiency of someone who keeps buildings steady. Be near 2:15 by 9:36. Stand where the sound will catch her whole chest. Keep the radio low enough to hear the electric hum, high enough to hear Haney if the night pulled a thread they didn't expect. At 9:34, the hallway's light took on that submarine stillness evening schools get. Bright to the eye, dim to the breath. The drinking fountain ticked once, then decided against a second. Not a student in sight, the kind of empty that makes even a good story whisper. She looked up. The taped hammer presented its little grey shirt, her small block letters, Discon, like a label on a museum piece. To her left, The maglock panel rested with its red dot, polite and waiting. She rolled her shoulders once to make them remember they were attached to a back that could handle things. 9:38 arrived with a soft shift in the fluorescence, as if they inhaled. 9:39 brought the blink. The panel woke, considered, then offered its line with the shy confidence of a machine that has learned a script. 21:39 open, no badge. Alma didn't speak into the radio. There are nights when words spook the air. She let the line write itself and kept her eyes on the stairwell. In the first floor well below, Haney had already raised his chin. He could feel timing the way night staff do, through soles and bone. He moved, not fast, not slow, just deliberate, up the stairs. 9:41 came like a tide you knew by heart. The water line reached the same stone. The bell rang. Same clear strike, same honest fade. Then a second strike laid so close to the first, it sounded like a word spoken twice on a single breath. The sound didn't rush. It wasn't here to perform. It landed, looked around, and sat down. Alma watched the taped hammer. A person will watch what they know cannot move, and in doing so, measure something else. The tape didn't twitch. The hammer kept its posture. The bowl sang anyway. She felt the ring in the metal locker doors, in the narrow glass windows that live in classroom doors, in the skin along her arms. Above the trophy case, the PA speaker hummed its background hum, neutral and steady. No tone, no trick. Haney reached her shoulder and added his body to the space like another pillar. They didn't touch. They stood near, same height as the bell, same time in their chest. He looked up. He didn't prod this time. He looked like a man taking attendance and finding all present except the right explanation. "Panel," he said. She pressed the scroll button with a thumb she kept from shaking by giving it a job. The second line marched on to the small red field, obedient as a clerk. 21:40, closed, no badge. She pressed again, hopeful, for a third line, another shape to the small mystery. Nothing. The panel blinked once as if to say, "That is all I know." Haney nodded toward the closet where the old breaker for the bell bank lived like a retired uncle. They opened the door. You could smell metal the way you can sometimes smell rain. He threw the handle down. It had already been down for 3 years. He threw it up and down again the way you do when you want a lever to remember who it is. "We'll kill it next time," he said. It wasn't a threat. It was an experiment. If the bell rang with the handle physically off, then whatever they were measuring sat elsewhere. Alma lifted a Polaroid camera from the lower shelf of her cart. Click. The bell face, the tape, the date scrawled on the white lip. Makeshift evidence that made both of them feel steadier. She tacked the picture to the cinder block with masking tape, the tape tearing ragged, paper on block, a small flag of "We saw this." They took a slow walk together toward the third-floor stairwell, the one the panel liked to mention. The top door's push bar sat level, unbothered. Haney crouched, eye close to the seam, and looked for the kinds of marks human hands leave without meaning to. Fingernail burrs, oil, new sheen on old paint. The door offered him nothing. He touched the bar with 2 fingers. It gave and returned like a good spring. Behind the door, an emergency light showed its steady, tiny heartbeat. "Sometimes a night decides it wants a story," he said, not to insist on ghosts or deny them, but to name the human habit of building meaning around persistent minutes. Alma didn't argue. She didn't agree. She reached up and pressed the top corner of the Polaroid with a thumb to make sure the tape would hold. Friday morning arrived with paper. Mrs. Gerber, the assistant principal, had heard the copy room rumour. The old bell was acting up. She didn't like the phrase, "Things act up, kids act up, paper does not act up, paper sits and waits to be read." She asked Alma for the truest line. Alma gave it. "We heard one ring at 9:41 last Thursday. We heard two last night. The stairwell panel shows an open and close at 21:39 and 21:40. It says, 'No badge.'" "No badge," Mrs. Gerber repeated, circling the words on the printout in blue felt pen. She called facilities. They promised an electrician next week. She put the printout in a manila folder and wrote a tab label that made the whole thing less slippery. Bell. Spring 82. Folders do that. They give a handhold to something that doesn't want to be held. Weekend came like a long exhale. Saturday's light walked in differently and sat on the floors instead of running. Alma scrubbed cafeteria tables and listened to chairs go back in a chorus of friendly clinks. She didn't walk up to 214, not from fear, from respect. Places notice when you attend to them only to see if they will misbehave, and they answer accordingly. Monday, a science teacher paused in the hall and told her he'd once heard a weird bell thing during a snow day years ago, like it kept one ring for itself. He smiled when he said it. People add a smile to make a strange memory travel easier. She tucked the note away. The building was a braid. Little strands wanted to be crossed sometimes. By the third Thursday, she replaced the tape on the hammer, a nurse with a better bandage. She wrote her initials again, AC, small, neat. The old tape, soft with time, she folded twice and put in the tiny zipper pocket of her apron. It felt like saving a promise without naming it. At 9:39, the panel behaved as if it had been taught. Open, no badge. At 9:41, the bell gave them what they had come to half expect and not understand. This time, one clean strike, then a second laid almost on top of it, then the faint suggestion of a third that changed its mind halfway down, a brush more than a blow. Mr. Haney had moved farther down the corridor this time to break the geometry, to see if distance mattered. The ring reached him just the same. He felt it in his ears the way you feel an elevator when it remembers another floor is coming. They killed the PA amplifier for a minute, just to be sure no ghost tone hid in there. Silence behaved correctly. The panel showed its paired line at 21:41, closed, no badge. They added a sketch to the log, Haney's square for the stairwell, Alma's dot for the bell, and wrote, PA amp off at 21:43, no ring. For a week, the story nested in their shirt pockets. Mrs. Gerber filed. Alma cleaned. Haney checked the low patient heartbeat of the meters and drew their shapes on a yellow pad. Nobody argued with anyone. Nobody tried to sell a legend. They let the minute keep proving itself. When the electrician finally came, with his toolbox like a small, stubborn suitcase, he unscrewed the bell face and showed them the cap on the dead wire, the dust, the simple old bones of a system that had retired in 1979. He said, not energizable in the flat way people say things when they've learned not to dramatize what a circuit can't do. He left a carbon copy. Paper had been satisfied. The bell perhaps not. Friday night was quiet. It was not Thursday. The hallway held to its line. If they had wanted a pleasant ending, they could have written it there. Misread panel, old wire, the kind of small mix-up that keeps night workers friendly and skeptical in the same breath. But the next Thursday, 1 week after the electrician's assurance, Mr. Haney would pocket the breaker handle, leaving the switch physically unable to move, and the bell would ring anyway. And the hallway would add one more human detail to its folder, the kind that explains more than it spooks. And the fourth Thursday didn't announce itself. It arrived the way real nights do, by degrees. The light after dismissal had that tired gold that comes when a sky tries for a last show and settles for something modest. Teachers stacked handouts in small personal piles. A basketball rolled somewhere and rested against a baseboard like it had found a corner that fit its shape. The building noticed the rhythms, tucked them where halls tuck everything, then leaned into evening. Mr. Haney came in 5 minutes early. He said nothing about bells, not to Alma, not to Mrs. Gerber, not even to himself inside his own head. But he did one quiet, deliberate thing. He went to the utility closet and looked at the breaker for the old bell bank, like you look at an old photograph of yourself when you still had a different haircut. He set his palm on the metal faceplate the way a person sets a palm on the hood of a car, listening through touch. Then he flipped the handle all the way down. It had lived there for years, but ritual matters. He removed the handle entirely, a small metal tongue, and slid it into his breast pocket behind his pen. He buttoned the pocket. There was something satisfying about an absence you could verify with a fingertip. Alma rolled her cart down the second-floor hall with a slow confidence that made the mop bucket water move like a quiet lake. She counted the small things that help a person stay steady in a place that once startled you. The one ceiling tile with a faint tea stain, the locker number with the missing screw that makes a tiny rattle when you pass, the rectangle of tape she had put above room 214, the pencil letters on that tape that said Discon in a voice so small you had to lean close to hear it. She felt fine, not brave, not scared. Present. On the first floor, the payphone hung on its bracket like a little heavy promise. The coin return had collected a dime and 2 pennies and a piece of paper with a phone number written in a hopeful hand. There is always a number like that in a school. It is part of the fabric. 937 came and put its shoulders in place. Floors always change at 37. The air gets simpler. A vent hushes, that last little hiss, and the hallway feels like a held breath. Nobody is trying to hide. Alma glanced at the maglock panel at the stairwell. The red dot under the tiny display glowed with the calm of a nightlight in a child's room. At 9:38, the fluorescent nearest the library did a 1-second tremble and then held steady. It wasn't a flicker that meant anything. It meant everything if you were the kind of worker who pays attention. She pressed the talk button on her radio and said, "I'm on 2." She didn't ask where Haney was. They didn't waste words when the knight had asked the same question 3 times in a row. He answered anyway. "I'm at the panel," he said, voice low, like he was careful not to step on the quiet by accident. At 9:39, the panel gave them what it had learned to give: open, no badge. Alma watched the characters arrive left to right like a tiny marching band. Down below, Haney let his pencil write 2139 in a box on a yellow legal sheet, then wrote "open" and drew an arrow the way people who trust paper draw their thoughts when they want to keep them from running around the room. He added one more touch this time. He drew a little sketch of the hallway, the bell, a rough bowl, the stairwell door, a rectangle with a line for the bar. He wasn't an artist. He was a man who liked to make sure future him could stand in present him's footprints. Between 9:39 and 9:41, small noises took their assigned seats. A distant custodial closet closed on a slow hinge. Somewhere a book slid on a desk and stopped at the edge like a well-trained dog. The payphone made a single, dry click, the soft sound an old switch makes when it decides it's finished with one position and ready for another. Alma didn't turn her head at the click. She let it arrive, let it sit, let it join the small choir. At 9:41 the bell rang. One clear strike, the sound a metal bowl makes when a certain tiny part of the world remembers its job. Then, half a heartbeat later, another strike came, so close to the first that the ear could have called it one fat note if you were a person inclined to make your world easier. The second didn't quite sit on the first. It leaned into it, changed the colour. A third sound tried to drop in and lost courage part way, more brush than blow, a whisper of metal thinking about speech. Alma's eyes were on the hammer the whole time. Tape covers everything real people do to stubborn things. A cracked fume hood, a loose folder label, a bell you promised to leave alone. The hammer remained still, under the tape, serious as a straightback at a desk. Her hand felt the sound on her forearm hairs before her brain finished naming it. She let her mouth stay closed. Some minutes want to be filled by the room, and not by voices. Down by the stairwell, Haney looked at the panel the way a person reads a heart monitor when they already know how the patient feels. Closed. No badge. He let the line print all the way and then pressed the button to capture the next one if it came. None did. He took the metal breaker handle from his pocket and held it like a simple piece of proof. He looked up to the ceiling and back to the handle and didn't smile, didn't frown. He breathed. Because this is what it felt like. The building had just told them it owned more than one way to ring a bell. "Breakers off," he said, when he reached Alma, as if she might not know, as if saying it aloud moved a bead on a small abacus the night kept. She nodded. They stood under the bell the way you stand under a porch roof while listening to rain, partly sheltered, fully exposed.
"Try the PA," Alma said. Not because she believed the amplifier inside the office had learned to throw fake bell tones just for them, but because you do the simple experiment before you start talking about stories you can't hold. They walked to the little rack by the principal's desk, flicked the power off, counted to 70 with the easy quiet that comes when two people agree, then flicked it back on. No tone, no trick. The amplifier did what amplifiers do, waited to be told something and promised it would repeat it exactly.
"Room?" Haney asked, and she knew which one without the number. He meant 214. They opened the door with her key, and the room gave itself over the way empty rooms do, wider than they look in daylight, more serious without bodies. Chalk on the board remembered math. Student desks remembered knees. A paperback on a back table remembered a thumb folding a corner. On the far wall, the PA speaker sat in its little perforated cage. Above the door, the bell's twin was there too, the same tape, the same disc on, the same feeling of a mouth politely covered to keep it from telling a secret. They stood inside without moving. That's a choice people make when they want to make space for noticing. The air smelled like pencil shavings, old paper, and a floor that had been mopped and then left alone long enough to dry to a good shine. If there had been a person behind a desk, the air would have offered breath. If there had been small life, mouse or bird, the room would have had that faint friction sound living things bring to corners. There was nothing but electricity humming inside tubes, and the soft thunder of two human hearts acting like they were not being listened to. Haney examined the bell face with a small flashlight he carried. Dust told the truth dust always tells. Nothing had moved under the tape. No finger trail, no bright smear where a tool had grazed the edge. The screw heads made their tiny crosses like a chapel full of whispers. He lowered the light and said, "Why 9:41? It was not a challenge. It was the kind of question you ask a room to see if the room already knows the answer and is deciding whether you're the kind of person it tells. Alma thought of patterns people keep without meaning to. A detention time. A bus that usually arrives late on a certain run. A teacher who hates the last 2 minutes of a period and lets the class go kindly at the 41st minute because she cannot stand the formal end. Buildings learn those little rebellions. They do not judge, they store them. They agreed, without needing to say it, to widen the experiment for the next week. Not to invite anything, not to chase, to change where they stood, which door they watched, which ladder of attention they climbed. People think small shifts don't matter. They matter in buildings. The angle of an ear, the width of a step, the way a hand rests near a bar instead of on it. Buildings have their own geometry, and sometimes they are generous when you respect it. Between Thursday and Thursday, the school did its regular miracles. A student solved a proof and felt big for a whole day. The choir built a chord out of 15 ordinary throats. A history teacher turned a year in a book into a feeling you could walk around in. Mrs. Gerber filed the electrician's note from last week, not energizable, on yellow carbon in the new folder labeled Bell Spring 82. She did not like the word ghost, not because she disbelieved in the possibility of one, but because ghost confused the work. Her job was to keep the living steady. Paper helped with that. The 5th Thursday, Alma put fresh tape on the hammer again, not because it needed it, but because a new bandage makes a person feel like attention has been paid. She wrote her initials a little smaller this time. She pocketed the old tape, folded, and carried it like a tiny receipt. Haney walked the halls before 9:30 with an unhurried step and made sure doors met frames and frames met walls. He touched the top of the stair rail with 2 fingers at each landing. It made no difference. It helped. At 9:37 the payphone clicked again, one small mechanical yes. At 9:39 the panel printed open, no badge. Alma stood at the panel this time, not under the bell because the experiment mattered. She wanted to watch the line arrive the instant the world asked the door to lie. She pressed the button immediately and kept the panel's pace. At 9:41 the bell rang. It gave them 2 clean strikes, then hesitated in a way that felt like a human catching themselves in a habit they suddenly see from the outside. Down the long corridor, Haney felt the sound more than heard it, pressure in the middle ear, like an elevator changing its mind. He was so far down at the emergency exit that his presence should have mattered to the geometry if it had been about his body in the space. It did not. The pattern held its own center. They turned off the PA amplifier again for a minute. Nothing. They wrote it. They checked the maglock panel again. Closed, no badge, sat under open, no badge, like twins who always present together. They looked at each other and did not try to interpret. They were not priests, they were caretakers. Their job was to keep the building honest, not to write scripture. That night, after midnight, when most truths leave the building to sleep, Alma lay in bed and finally let herself imagine the simplest human possibilities. Keys are stories. Keys get borrowed. Keys get kept. Keys get lost in deep bags with receipts that hurt to touch. She thought of who loved room 214, the way people love rooms. She thought of the substitute teacher with the coin purse, the way the old plastic cracked at the edge of the badge. She thought of the math teacher who sometimes stood in that doorway like he had to measure edges before he could go home. She did not make an accusation in her head. She simply put the idea on a table and walked around it. By morning, the building had made its own small gesture in return. On Mrs. Gerber's desk, under a rubber band, sat a note in tidy teacher script. Room 214 key, found missing from ring. Mr. Russo, that was not the reveal. That was the string tugged once. The reveal would be quiet, almost tender, and it would change the shape of the disturbance from what's in the wires to what do people hold when they can't hold time. The difference matters. The answer would not tidy every edge. It would soften the part that keeps you awake. The handle for the breaker stayed in Haney's pocket for one more night. It wasn't proof that circuits had souls. It was proof that the building trusted them to ask good questions. That is a very different kind of haunting. The answer began in the office, the way many answers in schools begin, with a question that sounded like housekeeping and turned into feelings. Mrs. Gerber asked the receptionist to page a substitute teacher between second and third period. The woman arrived with a careful step, a coat folded over one arm like she didn't want to stress the shoulders, a coin purse from another decade, and eyes that had practiced being kind before they practiced being in charge. "Mrs. Vega," Mrs. Gerber said in a tone that meant, "I respect you and I also need to check a thing." We had a key go wandering. Mrs. Vega opened the coin purse. It wasn't a prop. It was a habit. She kept her badge in there because lanyards irritated her neck. She kept a roll of peppermint candies that had been in and out of that little bag long enough to powder the wrappers. And she kept, without thinking about the shape of it, a ring with 3 keys and one small plastic tag, yellowed, with 214 written in faded marker. She blinked at the tag like you blink at an old photograph that shows a person you still are in some places. "Oh," she said, "I thought that was my old filing key." Her voice didn't have guilt in it. It had the surprise people feel when the past steps lightly into the present and sits down at their table without knocking. She touched the tag and explained something without being asked, the way some people confess the human parts that don't hurt anyone. 214 used to be my room, she said, almost in apology to the room, not to the administrator. Back before they moved us to the new wing, we didn't have tones then, we had the bell. If I was late by a minute, I'd knock twice on the door frame and say, "We'll borrow 2 from study hall." She smiled at the memory. She tapped her knuckles on the office counter, twice by reflex, a light, polite sound. It wasn't theatrical. It was muscle memory. Mrs. Gerber did not mention Thursdays. She did not say 9:41. She took the ring gently and set it on a pad of paper like a delicate object that wanted a soft landing. She thanked Mrs. Vega, wrote the key back into the control log, and made a copy of the page for the folder. She managed a whole school by moving paper just enough to help people be decent. This fit that work exactly. After lunch, she walked alone up to room 214 and stood outside the door without opening it. She looked at the top of the frame, that strip of wood students barely notice. It had no dents you'd call damage. It had a 1-inch shine where a knuckle had travelled many times and buffed the finish smooth. If you weren't looking for it, you'd miss it. If you were the kind of person who files details, you wouldn't. That night, Alma and Haney decided without a speech to let the building tell them the end of the story. They stood in their places because endings are sweeter when the positions remain familiar. Alma under the bell, Haney by the panel. The breaker handle sat again in Haney's pocket, a little weight that said, "We did our part." The Polaroid of the bell, tape and all, still clung to the wall with 2 strips of masking tape that had started to curl like tired fingernails. At 9:36, the payphone clicked. At 9:38, the panel printed, "Open, no badge." At 9:40, this felt new, there came a gentle double knock from down the hall. 2 little notes on wood. Not a demand, not a fear sound, the sound you make when you don't want to startle anyone in a room you believe is already yours. Alma turned toward it and felt an ache behind her chest bone that had no danger in it. It had recognition. It had the shape of classrooms at their best, someone coming back to their life. 9:41 landed and did what minutes do when they've been rehearsed for years. The bell rang once, clean, like a good name spoken in a roll call. A second strike came late, not stacked on the first, and then stopped. Nothing followed. The space after felt wider than any of the other Thursdays, like a thought opened and then closed its own book. The panel printed closed, no badge. Haney pressed the button again out of habit, as if a postscript might appear for a man who kept folders neat. None came. He looked down the corridor toward Alma. She lifted a hand and rested it on the hallway air, the way you rest a hand near a shoulder you don't touch. They both stood very still and thanked the building, not aloud, not with any formal words, but with a quiet that told the room they understood a little more now, and that understanding made their work softer, not smaller. They opened. 214. It held its usual breath. Desks in rows, a last chalk phrase halfway erased, about factoring something that made sense to somebody yesterday and would make sense to somebody else tomorrow. The bell's twin above the door kept its tape. Near the threshold, under the push bar, Haney's fingers found a small, brittle piece of plastic, curved, yellowed, the broken end of a key fob with 214 on it in a ghost of ink. He pinched it between thumb and finger and lifted it like a shell the ocean had decided to trade back. The rest of the facts arrived like facts do when they're ready. The camera by the end of the second-floor corridor, with its polite, grainy honesty, showed a silhouette on 3 consecutive Thursdays. Not a shadow you'd romanticize. A person in a coat who walked with a teacher's gait, purposeful but not in a hurry, who paused, who tapped twice on the frame like someone announcing herself to a room she cared about, who stood inside for a minute, then left at 9:41. Not sneaking, not breaking, not even hiding. The maglock said no badge because the key bypassed that part of the story. The bell said yes because some small part of a room knows when a ritual has arrived and answers with whatever language it has left. When Mrs. Gerber spoke with Mrs. Vega the next day, the conversation didn't try to manufacture guilt. The building taught the living better manners than that. Mrs. Vega listened, nodded twice, and then spoke in a voice that had more years in it than the folder could hold. "I thought I could be friendly to the room," she said. "That's silly, I know." She smiled at herself, but didn't mock the feeling. "I would tap, so it wouldn't startle the night folks if they were near. I never touched the bell, I know it's off." She said the word off with the easy precision of a person who spent 30 years telling small groups of teenagers what is and isn't true in a world that confuses both. Mrs. Gerber thanked her for bringing the key back. She didn't make a speech about protocols. She didn't make a speech about ghosts. She wrote a short note for the folder. Key returned. Sub checked in. Room verified. She set the note on top of the electrician's carbon and the maglock printout, and the stack made sense in the way paper makes sense, made a pile where a scatter had been. That's one kind of resolution. It's not the only kind. Alma and Haney did one last thing that wasn't on any checklist. At the end of their shift, they went to room 214 together. They didn't open the door. They stood outside, looked at the small shine on the upper frame where a knuckle had worn the finish honest, and then looked at the bell above the hall. Alma smoothed the Polaroid's tape. Haney reached into his pocket and touched the breaker handle and decided, without needing any permission, to put it back the next day. Not because it had power, because they were done measuring the place with instruments. The rest was going to be measured with memory. The bell didn't ring the next Thursday, or the one after. The panel stopped making the red lines that had startled Mrs. Gerber out of an early evening. The payphone clicked when it had reason to and slept when it didn't. The chalkboard collected new equations with the patience chalkboards have. The Polaroid yellowed a little at the corners in the spring humidity, but the date and Alma's initials stayed readable. People who noticed it asked what it was, and Alma said the true thing that fit into a hallway. "It's for us." If you stood there late some night with the lights dimmed and the kind of quiet that makes a person check their breathing, you could feel 3 soft facts arrange themselves around you like chairs at a kitchen table. First fact, a drill asked humans to touch locks and humans did. Second fact, keys slip rings and wander into coin purses, and the hands that carry them mean well. Third fact, buildings remember rituals, and sometimes even after the wires are cut, they use that memory to make a sound that feels like home. Was there electricity in the bell? No, an electrician had said his neat, not energizable, and he was a man who earned trust. Was there a person moving through the hall at 9:39 and leaving at 9:41? Yes. Was there a way a taped hammer can sing? The answer you can live with is this: rooms answer us back. Sometimes the answer is air, sometimes it is numbers, sometimes it is a sound we hear in our teeth because we gave that minute the right shape. For so many years it kept the habit when we forgot to. Months later, when the year turned and a new set of keys got engraved, Mrs. Vega kept subbing. She walked slower on stairs, and students who were good at being kind slowed without being asked and pretended they just had a lot of books. When she was assigned to 214, she did not tap. She rested her hand on the frame and smiled to herself and said, "Present," in her head, and that was enough. 2 years down the road, on Alma's last day, before she transferred to an elementary school closer to home, she folded the very first strip of tape, the dry one she had saved in her apron pocket when she changed the bandage at the start, and left it on the inside sill of 214's window. The late sun slanted across the room and warmed the glue into a gold you only get for 60 seconds on certain days. She didn't tell anyone. Haney passed the room during his rounds, saw the little grey ribbon and felt a weight like gratitude step off his ribs. He touched the breaker handle hanging in its place and, for the first time since he'd pocketed it, didn't touch his shirt to check for it. The building didn't need that anymore. If you need a tidy ending, you can use the folder. Maglock entries, electrician note, key control log, camera stills in polite black and white. If you need the ending that helps you sleep, you can use this one. A woman loved a room enough to keep 1 minute with it on a day of the week that had been hers. She knocked softly to say hello to a space that once knew her voice. The bell, retired from its job but not from its memory, returned the greeting the only way it still knew, exactly once, sometimes twice, then learned, with her, to let go. When people speak about hauntings, they often mean fear. The better kind means recognition. This one was made of routine, kindness, and the narrow slice of grief you carry for the person you used to be on a weekday at 9:41. That's why it held you in the dark and didn't keep you there. It showed you how human a building can be when you treat it like it's listening. It showed you how small, honest sounds, 2 knuckle taps, 1 bell note, can add up to something that feels like a story and ends like a lesson. Lincoln High kept the bell, it kept the tape, it kept the folder, it kept all the little proofs a place keeps. And even after everyone forgot the exact dates and who did what in what order, the hallway remembered enough to keep a good hush on Thursday nights, just in case an old hand came to the door out of habit. If she did, it would know her. It would answer the way old friends answer, soft, simple, right on time, and then quiet again. Let the hallway go quiet behind you. 1 slow breath, in and out. If you're settled, slide with me from a bell that shouldn't ring to a morning that shouldn't drift. Different state, different rules, same small pressure. It's before first period on a rural route, fog on the ditches, diesel in the air, and a substitute driver who misses 1 turn and puts 3 kids at the wrong gate. Radios say one thing, paper says another. Story 2 begins at the chain link on Route 12. The morning began in that Ohio way where the fog lifts just enough to make you think it's gone, then sinks back to remind you who's in charge. Fields wore a skim of silver. Ditches breathed. On County Route 12, the school bus yard yawned to life. Diesel coughing, tail lights thudding red against the grey, radios warming into their clipped good mornings. Drivers took their routes like they took their coffee. Same cup, same hand, same habit, every day. Today the route binder for bus 17 had a new signature. The usual driver, Dottie, was out sick. In her place stood a substitute named Alan Pierce, mid-40s, an even man in a canvas jacket, the kind who keeps a pocket notebook and doesn't like to be late. He had driven this district before, sports shuttles, overflow days, one steady month when a driver took maternity leave. He knew the bones, but Route 12 had small bones, the kind you only respect after holding them a few mornings in a row. Dispatch slid the route sheet across the desk anyway, a photocopied map, stop list in 10-point type, turn by turn with the right-hand kink around the grain silos circled in yellow highlighter. On the bottom corner, note, do not use maintenance gate, bus loop only. The maintenance gate sat 3/10 past the loop. Chain link, a locked chain that looked loose from a distance, a habit of being ignored by delivery trucks who promised to be quick. New drivers noticed the wide gravel apron and saw relief. Old drivers knew that road loved mistakes. Alan took the radio check like everyone else, thumb to the mic, 17 copy base, dispatch answering with a tone that meant things were normal. Later, the dispatcher would point to a neat line in the radio ledger, 0711 check-in, bus 17, Pierce. The line would matter because Alan would say a different thing later. Radio was dead. The ledger would disagree without raising its voice. He rolled out at 0658, wipers doing that polite swipe that bothers nobody. The route unwound as routes do, the girl with the flute who always looked at her shoes until the bus door folded open, the brothers with the farm coats who stood too far from the road and ran the last 10 steps. The quiet little boy, Cal, who waited with his grandmother under a floodlight that made the fog look like snow. Alan found each driveway by mailboxes, tree cuts, porch bulbs. He kept his speed under 30 on the slick stretch past the creek. He checked his mirror like a man trying to see both the day ahead and the years behind. On the second page of the route sheet, a small box read, "Turn right at Old Mill Troncal bus loop entrance immediately after silos." It was written in a voice that assumed obedience. Drivers obeyed it because obedience made the mornings go round. Alan saw the silos with their rust lip and the low dark of the bus loop beyond. He lifted his hand to signal, nobody behind to see it, a habit anyway. And then the fog fattened. The silos blurred. The front of the school, a one-story brick with a flag at half-mast for a local veteran, slid behind a veil. In that 2-second shrink, the loop mouth looked like a darker seam in a dark cloth. The maintenance gate's gravel apron, broad as a shoulder, appeared like something ready to catch you. He made the wrong turn the way people do, gently, almost kindly. The bus nosed to the chain link. The gate carried a chain and a lock that were more suggestion than barricade, looped in a habit born of familiarity. A man could pull forward, let the bumper touch, then ease the chain aside with a boot, if he had a reason. Alan didn't touch it. He braked, put it in neutral, looked down at the radio and pressed the button. "Base 17, he said. The radio gave him silence that sounded like fog inside a box. He tried again and heard only his own breath. He set the mic down in that careful way people do when they want to accuse a thing without saying it. He would later tell anyone who asked. Radio was dead. The ledger disagreed, but the bus heard what he heard. Nothing. He stepped to the door, folded it open 2 inches, let the morning creep in. The air felt like chilled milk. 3 kids were at the front. Cal, a girl named Lexi with a red backpack and a folder full of stickers. A 6th grader, Marco, big for his age, who had already figured out how to lean and look bored like it didn't cost anything. "This isn't the bus loop," Marco said, not rude, accurate. Fog grabbed the building, Alan said, a sentence that felt dumb even as it tried to be kind. We'll walk around from here. Safer to set you down and swing back than try to back this thing blind. He knew backing was against policy except with a spotter. He also knew emptying 3 kids at a chain service gate wasn't policy either. Between 2 wrongs, he picked the one that used human legs. He popped the door, lowered the steps. The chain lay slack enough that a child could duck it without touching metal. He walked them to the gate and set a hand on the top rail, as if to stabilize the morning. By the time they crossed the asphalt and hit the wide sidewalk toward the cafeteria doors, the school had begun its daily hum. The kitchen fans threw their low, steady sound. A custodian pushed a mop bucket like a tired boat. A teacher in a windbreaker walked in with a stack of white copy paper hugged to his chest. No alarm bell, no panic, just a small wrong thing sliding into a large right one, hoping to become invisible by joining it. The cafeteria POS system time-stamped 3 milk transactions at 0731. Later, the printed tape would curl on a metal spike with the time neat at the edge. 0731-12, 0731-18, 0731 and 46. 3 kids, 3 cartons, a normal number you could hold in your hand. At 0733, a parent's dash cam, parked by the loop, pointed at the flag, caught a bus gliding past on the road outside, not into the loop. The camera's cheap clock read 7:34, wrong by a minute. The parent later corrected this and wrote the true time in pen on a post-it, 0733 little proofs. The day collected them the way fog collects on sleeves. At 0723, the fuel island at the yard printed a receipt for bus 17, 8.2 gallons. The slip would bother people because fuel happened after kids, and someone would ask, when did he have time to fuel? The answer would sit there, simple. He fueled when he got back, before the short town shuttle. The weird part wasn't the fuel. The weird part was the wrong gate and the radio that stopped talking for one man while it kept working for a ledger. At 8:05, when the first bell put its tone into the school, the day took over for a while. Calls, attendance, math, announcements about the bake sale, a counselor's reminder that if you brought a puppy to school you had to ask first because last time someone's science class lost most of its glue sticks to joy. The morning reasserted how strong it was, but the wrong gate had a way of collecting weight as hours passed. By 9:10, Lexi told her homeroom teacher they'd come in by the chain. By 10:15, the receptionist heard a version of the story that included a flat tire and a dog. By lunch, a teacher asked dispatch if 17's radio was down, and dispatch said no, we have a 7.11 check-in right here. By last bell, a small thing had become a story. It was not dramatic. It was precise. Precision is what makes certain small things feel like they have a pulse. That night, the district printed the radio log and laid it on the transportation office desk under a magnet that said, "Have a nice day." Someone drew a line under 0711 and wrote, "Ask." The fog lifted out of the ditches and went wherever fog goes to report what it did. The chain at the maintenance gate hung exactly the way it had in the morning, a small loop pretending to be a lock. What happens next is not collision or chase, it is people putting their hands on paper and asking the day to repeat itself with the boring voice that keeps you safe. The day will try, it will get most of it right. One part will keep slipping. Transportation offices are museums of routine, clipboards with clean forms, pens chained the way banks chain theirs, a corkboard with Polaroids of buses in snow and sun, drivers in sunglasses waving like they were famous. In the corner, a metal box, the radio recorder, a beige thing with a whirring belly, and a drawer for tapes even though it had been digital for a decade. It logged, always. You could insult it, and it would still log. At 6:55 a.m. the next day, the dispatcher, a woman named Ruth, who wore her headset like a crown she didn't want but would bear, ran back through the previous morning on fast forward. The ledger showed 0711 check-in, bus 17, Pierce. The audio file agreed, a little carrier tone, then Alan's voice, matter of fact, 17 copies base. Her own voice followed, base copies. After that, nothing notable, not even a click from him. He hadn't called again. The ledger wasn't lying. It was also not telling her why a man with a dead radio had audibly spoken on it. She printed the route sheet again and circled the turn to Old Mill Road, her circle bigger than the last, as if increasing ink width could change history. She pulled a laminated map and dragged a dry erase marker along the path. Route 12 east, right at Old Mill, immediate right into bus loop. Do not pass the loop. Do not use the maintenance gate. The maintenance gate she marked with a red X, large enough to be seen from the ceiling. Alan arrived at 7:05 with the quiet posture of a person who believed he'd done his best inside a dumb minute and was ready to be told a better way. He took off his jacket, folded it exact, placed it over the back of a plastic chair. When Ruth asked about the radio, he said what he believed. Dead, soon as I needed it. I pressed nothing, twice. She turned the speaker up. You called in at 11 after, Alan. I did, he said. After that, dead. He did not flinch at the ledger. He accepted that two truths could sit in one chair and make the sitting uncomfortable. Why the maintenance gate? She asked. Not mean, the way you ask somebody why they took the alley instead of the street when both go home. Fog folded over the front, he said. Loop looked farther than it is. Felt wrong to back. Felt wrong to nose along blind. I could see asphalt at the chain and knew I could set them down and be sure their feet were on school property. Ruth wrote as he spoke. Not to trap him, to build a small bridge from his words to the ones she would have to write in a report if a parent called with heat in their voice. She made a note to ask the principal whether any camera on the building had eyes in that direction. Most didn't. They were old, and priorities had faces. At 7:18, her screen showed 17 rolling by the yard camera, just a nose, just enough to know it had left on time. By 7:23, the fuel island printed its own little truth. Bus 17, 8.2G, 0723. He must have fueled after the drop. People would ask why he didn't fuel before. He would say, I plan to fuel after, like Dottie does. You could argue with that choice if you were looking for a place to put your worry. It wasn't a lie or even unwise. It was a point on a map. In the school office, the attendance secretary, a meticulous person named Brenda, returned with the cafeteria POS tape, ISRO 731 3 milks. She liked tapes. They were small spines. She also had a dash cam still from a parent, printed off a home computer, pixels like a quilt, showing a bus on Route 12 at 0733. My clock is a minute fast, the parent had written on a sticky note. Brenda appreciated the courtesy of that confession. She handwritten 0733 true at the bottom so future eyes wouldn't have to do the math. By third period, Principal Mars walked the maintenance gate himself. He did what principals do when they want to know. He touched things. He touched the chain, the lock, the little grit that forms when gravel learns a corner too well. He measured the view from a child's height. The cafeteria doors down and right, the yard fence line, the slope of a place where water sits after rain. He imagined a bus nose, kids sliding out like marbles from a jar, small bodies crossing asphalt, while a man watched 3 directions at once. It was not criminal. It was not good. He told Ruth, add, review, gate policy with substitutes to the driver meeting agenda and bring a Sharpie. Sharpies make rules stick longer. Still, the radio. Still, the stop. Still, the feeling inside people that a morning had stepped out of its lane and, in doing so, exposed a seam nobody enjoyed seeing. In the afternoon, a short meeting, Ruth, Principal Mars, Alan. The room smelled of coffee and old paper, which is to say, it smelled like decisions. Ruth asked Alan to narrate the 7 minutes between his last kid and the wrong gate. He did, down to the fog thickening and the way the flag went away in it. "Could you see the loop mouth?" Mars asked. "Then no," Alan said. 2 seconds earlier? Yes. 2 seconds later? Yes. Then no. "Why not just sit?" Ruth asked. "Door shut. Radio us until we answer." Alan looked at the radio sitting on the desk as if it had hurt his feelings and he was trying to forgive it. "Because time with kids in the bus feels different than time on a form," he said. "If I can see the building, I try to get their feet on it. People in schools respect sentences like that more than they let on. It is a thing that can save you and a thing that can lead you wrong." They decided on 3 actions that made paper happy. Retrain subs on the loop, hang a heavier chain on the maintenance gate, add a laminated no student drop-off sign at adult eye level, include the right at Old Mill line in bold on the first page of substitute packets. They did not decide anything metaphysical about the radio. The ledger had its line. The man had his memory. If you push too hard on either, you make the human parts bruise. That evening, a mother from the far end of Route 12 phoned Ruth in a voice that trembled with the residue of not knowing what to do with feeling. "I'm not mad," she kept saying, which is a thing people say when they are scared and don't want to become unfair. It's just, we teach them one path, and then a grown-up says, "No, this other gate is fine today." My son came home vibrating. Ruth apologized in that steady, non-defensive way that comes from practice. She told the truth about the sign and the chain and the retraining. She did not talk about the radio because the mother did not need that puzzle to sleep. She needed to know tomorrow would look like yesterday again. That night, Ruth walked the yard. She stopped by the fuel island and looked at the small printer under its plastic hood. She liked the sound it made, the tidy whine when it pushed numbers onto paper. She thought of the Euro 723 receipt, a note pinned to a minute that already felt sore from handling. She imagined the path, wrong gate, set kids down, back the bus around in a lazy 3-point that took 50 heartbeats, nose out, a glide past the loop, back to the yard, top off, short shuttle. You could draw it, you could stand in it. It still felt a touch tilted. The next morning, fog again. Not as heavy, but honest. Alan drove a different route while the regular driver returned to 17. The right turn at Old Mill was uneventful, the loop mouth-to-mouth again. Children stepped down where they always had. The chain at the maintenance gate carried its heavier lock like a necklace it didn't enjoy. The radio chirped and checked and behaved. So why did it feel like something remained? Because of a dash cam, a fuel slip, a milk tape, and a man's sentence about time with kids. Little proofs orbiting a small mistake, throwing shadows longer than anyone thought they could. Tomorrow would ask for more. It always does. Patterns don't settle until someone names the part that makes them wobble. Morning. 2 wore thinner fog and a thicker set of questions. The buses went out like they always did, red lights pulsing bravely against a grey that would be gone by 3rd period. Inside the transportation office, Ruth built a small, careful pile, route sheet with the right-hand turn circled, radio ledger with the Euro 7-11 check-in underlined, the cafeteria POS tape showing 3 milks at 0731, the fuel island receipt, stamped 0723, the parent dashcam still annotated 0733 true. She tapped the stack into a square and let her hand rest on it, as if heat might help the paper settle into a single story. Principal Mars did what principals do when numbers clack against each other. He stepped away from paper and went to the ground. He took a walk from the bus loop mouth to the maintenance gate, not in a hurry, not dramatic, just measuring with a body. He stopped at kid height and looked back at the building. From that angle, the cafeteria doors looked close and kind, The flagpole felt like a lighthouse if you were small. He checked the chain. A newer, heavier length already hung. Lock snug, sign printed at adult eye level. No student drop-off. A custodian had zip-tied the sign so tight the plastic bowed a little. Some solutions announced themselves like that, too tight out of guilt. By mid-morning, a second parent brought in a dashcam clip, burned to a CDR labelled in blue pen. He was the sort who keeps careful things. Oil change logs in a folder, warranty cards stored by brand, a garage that knows where its own screwdrivers are. He had parked on Route 12 the previous day because he liked to watch the flag on windy mornings. His camera, aimed through the windshield, had caught the bus going past the loop, and then, 2 minutes later, had caught the bus again returning the other way. One clean glide west to east, then the same yellow nose east to west. Between those two passes, his tape showed an empty road and fog that thickened, thinned, and thickened again. He pointed to a little timestamp that said 0729 on the frame, where the bus went past the loop the first time. "My clock's slow," he said. "I figure add 4, so 0733 true for the eastbound pass, but this one." He tapped the 0729. "It would be 0733 if you trust this clock, 0729 if you don't, 0732 if you split the difference." "I don't trust it. I write it down anyway." Ruth watched the clip with that small frown administrators get when they're grateful for a thing that will also make their day longer. The camera didn't show the maintenance gate. It faced the wrong way. But it proved something about the bus's path. A pass by the loop, a return past the loop, with a 2 to 3 minute hole where the wrong gate lives. She thanked the man, labelled the CD, and added it to the stack. A groundskeeper mentioned footprints by the fence, kids' small prints in the damp gravel near the gate, heel dots and toe smears that say, "Hurry," without panic. He wasn't trying to be a witness. He was just the kind of man who notices where ground keeps stories. He didn't take a photo. He told the truth and made himself available if the truth needed repeating. Ruth walked down to see them herself. The prints were there, but not fresh anymore. Yesterday's fog had filled and softened them. You could still read the shape of a toe in one, the twist of a sneaker in another, the weight shift of an adult boot not far away. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would open a courtroom door. Enough. The Fuel Island receipt bothered her next, the one that said 0723 for bus 17, 8.2 gallons. If the 3 kids were milk stamped at 0731, how did a pump clock mark fuel 8 minutes before 3 children were recorded drinking? That math made a person want to pick the paper up and shake it. Instead, she checked other slips from that morning. Bus 12 had fueled 0717 and reported to radio at 0725. Bus 14 had fueled 0740 but had been seen in the loop at 0745 and swore it had fueled after drop. The pattern clicked like a gear you didn't know had teeth. The island clock drifted, not wildly. Enough. Maintenance, when asked, shrugged a familiar shrug. "It runs slow sometimes. We set it by hand." She wrote a note. "Fuel Island clock. Drift. Calibrate." She circled it twice. Quiet math, then relief. The 0723 fuel could be 0731 by the building's clock. 2 instruments, 2 truths, same minute in a wide Ohio morning. That left the radio. The recorder had Alan at 0711, 17 copies base, and then nothing from him after. No call about fog, no call about the gate, no dropping late 3 at maintenance that Ruth wished existed in a world where people wipe their feet before entering rooms. When she lifted the mic on bus 17 that afternoon and pressed the talk button, the bass chirped as if happy to hear from anyone. She set the mic down, unscrewed the antenna lid, at the set, reseated it. She walked the cable under the dash with her fingers, feeling for nicks or bites where a previous repair might have left a scar. The wire looked fine. She didn't trust looked fine. She called the radio vendor. They sent a man with a calm toolbox. He name-checked the unit, checked voltage, checked the ground, wiggled the mic lead at the solder, and watched for a blink. On the bench in the shop, the radio behaved like a patient who gets better as soon as you roll them near the doctor. Installed in the bus, ignition on, engine blowing that warm diesel breath across a leg, the same set had moments where receive stayed open, but transmit seemed to fall through a trap door. He tapped the mic and got the bass. He pressed the PTT and once, nothing. He noted it without crowing. He found a hairline crack where the mic's copper traced inside the plastic handle. It would transmit if you pressed like a pianist. It would fail if you pressed like a man driving across corrugated gravel with the wheel jiggling your wrist. Intermittent, he wrote. One of the most honest and useless words in the paper world. He soldered, wrapped, promised a new mic body by Friday. Ruth wrote intermittent in her stack with a small underline so future eyes would understand the tone of the day. In the hallway outside the principal's office, the three kids kept being kids. Cal, the quiet boy who waited under a floodlight, handed his teacher a note from his grandmother about a doctor appointment. He did not mention the gate. He mentioned that he didn't want to get in trouble for needing to be let off early the next day. Lexi, the red backpack girl with the sticker folder, drew a picture of a bus with a chain in front of it and wrote "No" on the chain in bubble letters. Marco, the sixth grader big for his age, rehearsed a story at lunch that had a dog in it, because rumours like dog bones when they're not sure where to bury themselves. The dog rumour circled to Ruth by afternoon. There was a stray by the loop. He stopped at the gate because of the dog. It would have been tidy, a kind of folk solution. Mars checked with the custodian who opens the kitchen. No dog. Camera by the loading dock? Nothing with four legs. Teachers at the windows? No sightings. He wrote "dog, no evidence" on a post-it, and his small humour showed. He drew a tiny paw print in the corner and crossed it out with one line so the paw still looked like a paw. People keep hearts like that even in offices. When the last bell finished its downswing and the hallways emptied to their late afternoon echo, a woman stopped Ruth in the office doorway. She was Cal's grandmother, the floodlight house. She held her purse like a plan. She had the tired kindness you get when you've stretched a family budget and a family story to make a child feel steadier than the weak. He was sick to his stomach yesterday, she said low. He told the driver, said he didn't want to be that kid and throw up on the bus again. She looked at the carpet when she said again. Ruth didn't ask about again. He said the man said, "We'll get you to a bathroom quick," and he let them out by the side. Cal won't say that because he thinks he'll get the man in trouble. I don't want the man in trouble. I want the path to be the path. Ruth thanked her, really thanked her, the way people do when a story gets its human spine back. She did not write vomit on an incident form. She wrote medical urgency noted, and she took a breath that felt like all the minutes had shifted an inch toward a true place. She called Mars. He came to the office so they could sit with this new piece of the map without rushing to write a summary for it. Neither of them liked how small emergencies tug at rules like loose threads. Both of them knew the right response is to restitch the rule and dress the emergency without judging either. They asked Alan to come by before he took the afternoon athletic shuttle. He sat in the same plastic chair, jacket folded the same way. They didn't pounce. They laid the pieces out like a simple meal, dash cams with times corrected, fuel slip with a clock that drifts, POS tape with 3 milks, the maintenance gate, the heavier chain, the new sign, the radio mic with its hairline crack, the grandmother's sentence. Alan didn't defend. He listened with his hands folded. then said the quiet thing. "He told me he was going to throw up," he said. I asked him if he could do 30 seconds. He nodded, then bent like he wasn't sure. The fog folded right then. I could see the cafeteria doors, and I could see his face, and I could see that chain. I chose the chain. I thought I could put their feet on the ground in 2 breaths and walk them through. Radio didn't answer. He made a small shape with his hand, a shape men make when they replay a steering wheel move. "I'm not proud of it. I'm not ashamed of it. I'd rather have you write me up than make that kid throw up in front of 2 others. Mars and Ruth sat with that for a full heartbeat's worth of quiet. Then 2. Rules are there to keep minutes like that from smoking. Still, human minutes exist. You don't fix them by pretending they don't. "We're going to write the rule louder," Mars said, "and we're going to write down that you made a medical call, and we're going to fix the radio, and we're going to walk the loop with substitutes and make where to stop look like a lighthouse, not a guess." He did not say, "Don't do it again." He didn't have to. It sat in the room, understood. The only piece that stayed with a shadow on it was the 2-minute hole by the maintenance gate. The minute the dash cams couldn't see, the minute the radio wouldn't carry, the minute footprints and milk and a grandmother's word stitched around without knitting shut. Intermittent is a technical word, and a human one. It's also a little haunting. The next day, at driver check-in, Ruth held the mic to her mouth like someone who had earned the right to be trusted by sounds. "Route reminder," she said, steady. "Old Mill right, loop only, no exceptions. If you have to stop, stop safe and radio until you have a human voice. If a kid is sick, call the office. We will meet you." She paused. "Radio shop replace the mic on 17. If your PTT button feels loose or weird, tell me, and I will fix it, not the air." The bass answered with a chorus of 10-4 in 10 different timbres. It sounded like a choir spread across 2 townships. None of that changed what happened. It changed what would. The letter that went home tried to be small. Printers make anything look official. They kept the paper soft by keeping the words calm. Principal Mars wrote it himself and asked Ruth to read before they ran stacks for home rooms. Yesterday morning, 3 students from Route 12 were dropped at the maintenance gate during heavy fog and escorted by the driver to the cafeteria entrance. This is not our standard procedure. The driver made this decision because a student reported feeling ill and needed immediate access to a restroom. No students were harmed. We have reinforced our drop-off policy with all drivers, bus loop only. We have added signage and improved chain barriers at the maintenance entrance. We have also serviced the radio on bus 17 to address intermittent transmission. If you have concerns, please call. He signed it with the pen that writes his cleanest name and added by hand a line on the few he knew by heart. "We appreciate your patience while we tune our routines." Some parents called, most didn't. The calls that came had the same heart. "Thank you for telling us. Please keep the path the path. Please don't punish a person for being kind in a fog minute. Just make sure they don't have to choose like that again." Ruth wrote the gist of each call on a legal pad, no names, just the temperature and the request. She kept the pad not because anyone would audit her kindness later, but because paper softens memory when the week gets loud. Alan took the write-up that comes when rules meet exceptions. It wasn't a scarlet letter. It was a note that said, "We saw what you did, we see why, we can't put that on the menu." He accepted it the way a person accepts a consequence that doesn't insult their reason. He asked if he could visit Cal's homeroom and make sure the boy didn't carry the wrong weight. Mars said no to the homeroom, too public, and yes to a quiet chat in the office with Cal, and his grandmother if they wished. They wished. They sat in the small room where walls are painted calmer than the hall. Alan kept his cap in his lap, brim toward him. Cal stared at the carpet pattern like every child who has ever been afraid of getting someone in trouble. Alan didn't make it formal. "You did the right thing telling me your stomach hurt," he said. "You did the right thing walking with me. If you ever feel like that again, you tell me sooner. I'll get us help faster and keep the rules better. That's my job." Cal nodded and asked if he could still sit near the front. He could. The grandmother said thank you in a voice that tried to keep the day from spilling over the edges. When they left, the room felt lighter by whatever amount a worry weighs when it goes back to regular size. The radio vendor replaced the mic on bus 17 and left the old one for Ruth to look at. You could barely see the hairline fracture inside the PTT track unless you angled it under a printer lamp and turned the plastic like a jewel. She held it in that small beam and watched the crack wink and disappear. She thought about all the ways a thing can work and not work at the same time, depending on how you hold it and how the road shakes the hand that's holding it. She wrapped the mic in a sandwich bag and dropped it in the examples bin drivers sometimes rummage through during trainings. A part of her liked that an intermittent failure existed in a bag you could touch. It made mystery feel polite. They calibrated the fuel island clock, which involved a man with a flathead screwdriver, a patience that looked like boredom, and an ear for the right tick. Future receipts arrived closer to the school's time. The old slip stayed in the file with a small note clipped to the top. Clock used to run slow by 6 to 9 minutes. That line would rescue a future argument before it started. The maintenance gate got a second chain lower down, a visual cue at kid height that said no. Grounds painted a yellow line across the asphalt from fence post to fence post and stenciled service only, big enough that even fog would have to push to cover it. It wasn't beautiful. It worked. Teachers told their students, if a bus ever stops somewhere odd, stay seated until an adult comes up the steps. Look for the loop. Listen for the voice on the radio. The kids nodded. They stored it the way kids store fire drill habits and lunchline kindness, deep enough to find it under pressure. Ruth built a substitute packet with 2 oversized photographs, the right-hand turn at Old Mill, taken from a driver's seat on a clear morning, and the mouth of the bus loop framed like an invitation. She added a third photo of the maintenance gate with a red X drawn on it and, in block letters under the image, "Not a student stop." She tucked the radio reminder right after. If base doesn't answer, keep calling. If you suspect intermittent, move the mic cord and press again. If still no contact, stop in a safe pull-off and wait for a voice. She put the packet in a sleeve so the paper would survive coffee and glove boxes. For a week, the story relaxed. Fog thinned. Routines found their grooves. The maintenance gate looked like it had always been a clear no. The cafeteria served milk that didn't need to witness anything for a while. You could almost forget the wrong minute until you drove past the loop and your eye caught the place where the fog had folded that day, the exact seam in the morning where vision took a breath. It is tempting, when something small shakes you, to want a single sentence to fix it. They got close. Sick child, human choice, wrong gate, radio mic cracked, fuel clock slow, POS tape solid, dashcam honest, footprint soft. Those sentences fit. They behaved. They let you sleep. One gap stayed, a 2-minute hole where the dashcams couldn't see, and the radio wouldn't carry, and 3 children crossed a piece of asphalt they shouldn't have had to cross. Nothing bad happened there. That's the truth. The gap still hums because gaps do that. They hum until routine hums louder. Months later, when fog came timid again in October and the corn stood dry and tall, Cal told his grandmother that his stomach didn't surprise him anymore on buses. He sat near the front. He watched the driver's mirror and liked seeing a person's eyes check on him without making a fuss. Lexi replaced the drawing in her folder with one of the loop and the flag and the words "right turn" in cheerful block letters. Marco told the new sixth graders that if they ever saw a chain, they should look for a grown-up and not try to be brave by being fast. A small, better culture grew out of a small, bad minute. That happens when adults apologize and then change something you can point to, not just a sentence you can quote. As for Alan, he kept subbing. He asked dispatch to pair him with the regulars a few mornings a month so he could watch their hands on the wheel at the places where maps turn into muscle memory. He never dropped at a chain again. He told two new drivers, quietly, that when fog moves in like a second piece of glass between you and the building, time will try to bully you. Let the watch be the watch, he said. Let the radio be the radio. Don't let need make you smarter than the rule. The office will come to you. Then he added the part that made him trustworthy. And if a kid says he's going to be sick, tell base that sentence first. The maintenance gate sign faded a bit by winter. Someone traced the letters with a Sharpie to keep the message thick. The Fuel Island clock drifted again in January and got reset. Intermittent is a travelling companion, so is routine. If you keep routine louder, intermittent learns to ride in the back seat. There's an urge when you tell a story like this, at the end of a long day, to put a bow on it so the night won't snag. Here is the bow that fits and doesn't lie. 3 kids were fine. A driver made a human choice for a sick child and, in doing so, walked across a rule. A radio misbehaved in the exact kind of way that makes you doubt yourself while a ledger calmly says hello. Clocks in different corners disagreed and then were taught how to be friends. Adults apologized and then altered the path so the next person won't have to pick between kindness and procedure at a chain link. And that gap, the 2 minutes no camera held, the minute the radio wouldn't catch, the space the print softened, stays with you not because danger lived there, but because it reminds you how thin mornings are when we depend on little machines and little decisions to be perfect. That's the human horror of schools sometimes, how much trust we place in a sequence of quiet yeses, and how exposed we feel when 1 minute says no. You sleep fine anyway. The next morning, the right turn is still there. The loop mouth is still a mouth. The flag still moves. The radio still clears its throat and waits for a voice. And somewhere a boy who once bent over his stomach stands up straight, steps down at the correct curb, and learns that adults repaired the path he walked. That's what we're for. Breathe out that diesel and fog. Let the chain gate fade behind us. If you're settled, come inside where the lights hum and benches keep their own neat rows. Different hour now, quiet Sundays, a lab that smells like pennies, an eyewash that keeps turning up dry, and a fume-hood sash with a crack no form can explain. The accident report is tidy. The building isn't. Story 3 waits in room 3B. The fire was small the way a match is small, bright, brief, and sure of itself. It lived for 10 seconds in room 3B and then died under a metal lid and a damp towel that smelled faintly of laundry soap. The accident report would later use the comfort word, the one adults like to lay over a scare like a clean napkin. Contained. That word would be true in the narrow way documents insist on truth. The room, however, would keep telling its own version in a slower voice for the rest of the week. 4th period had been steady. Mr. Klein, the chemistry teacher, with the permanent ring of blue ink around his right middle finger, liked quiet labs where small things stood in their right places and everyone breathed like they were working near a sleeping child. His students were good at that. They wore the safety goggles that never fit right over ears, tied back hair with elastic bands he kept in a jar, and measured liquids with the care of people trying to impress a future self. The fume-hood in 3B was the kind of box a school calls industrial when it is proud of a purchase. White face, dull steel lip, wide sash window that went up and down with the sticky slide of old glass. A taped sign on the frame read, "Low, sash only," in careful block letters. A hairline crack ran from the upper corner like a small winter river under ice. The hood still pulled air. You could feel it tug on sleeves if you leaned in. Facilities had logged the crack 2 weeks earlier and ordered a replacement sash. The maintenance ticket made a neat rectangle of promise. Hood, 3B sash, fractured, back-ordered. Back-ordered was the sort of word that made people nod and wait and tell themselves that careful use would bridge the gap. It often did, sometimes it didn't. It happened at 10:12 a.m. The clock above the chalkboard ticked the kind of tick rooms learn by heart. A student, a serious girl with a braid as tidy as the teacher's jar of rubber bands, decanted acetone near the lip of the hood, hot plate set to low. Her hand moved the way cautious hands move when a person is trying to do every part by the book. Inside the hood, a strip of filter paper lifted its corner in the steady draft like it was looking for attention. She didn't notice. No one would have noticed. The detail was small and honest. The hot plate's light glowed like a polite ember. Someone in the back laughed at a joke about copper pennies changing colour in lemon juice. Someone else wrote down the temperature in a small ledger. The detail that mattered slipped by without raising its voice. A tongue of flame rose and licked the edge of a beaker like it had been practicing off stage and finally got its cue. It wasn't a roar, it was a single, eager breath. Mr. Klein moved before his mind supplied verbs. Lid down, towel over, hot plate switch off, hand steady. He had rehearsed this motion in teacher training rooms with water and a stopwatch. Real rooms add breath and eyes. He felt every eye. He counted in his own head the way you count with a child who needs calm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When he lifted the lid, the flame had finished speaking. No alarm bell, no wild run. He kept the room quiet by giving it a quiet to copy. He said the sentence a good lab teacher uses when something quick and hot sits down without a chair. "We're fine." He kept his voice low enough that it made their breath match his. "We'll stand for a moment, check your sleeves, check your hair, check your bench for stray paper." The class stood. The boy with the copper joke held his mouth like someone who wanted not to be the person who laughs when nobody else does. The braid girl stared at the towel like the towel might turn into something else if she looked away. The nurse arrived with a small bag that looked like it belonged in a car trunk, gauze, cold packs, tape, a stubby flashlight. She was brisk without being busy, a woman who knew how to walk into a room that needed her and take only the space the room offered. She looked at faces, hands, eyes, and said the small doctorly lines that tie stray thoughts. "You're all right. You did the right thing. We will breathe once together." They breathed. 2 students, neighbours at the bench, raised their hands and said "dizzy" in the same minute, the word arriving from 2 mouths with the same sound, like a chime. She led them out, and the door swung closed with the hush of a library book going back to its shelf. The principal stood in the doorway. He did what good principals do when they arrive after the heat. He listened to the room first. He read the sign, "Low sash only." He looked at the hairline crack with the exact kind of frown teachers use when a comma sits in the wrong place. He glanced at the maintenance ticket copy taped inside the hood cabinet. Hood, 3B, sash fractured, back ordered. and made a small MM under his breath. He did not lecture. He told Mr. Klein to file the report before lunch and thanked the class for not bursting into a new shape. That's how adults keep schools calm, by naming a thing in the volume it deserves. When the last student stepped out at the bell, the room exhaled the way rooms do when they have been good, in front of authority. The light through the tall windows turned the chalk dust into a slow galaxy. Mr. Klein took off his goggles and set them on the bench with a habit so old it looked like muscle memory without an owner. He wrote the accident report with the pen that always stained his finger. He wrote the funny school words, smolder, lid, contained. He wrote the better ones, towel, calm, no injuries. He added the details that made him feel like his writing hand could hold the room steady, brand of hot plate, class size, where the bottle sat, who saw the flame first. He wrote the part about the hood without apology. Sash cracked, replacement ordered, kept low. He did not write the sentence that sat heavy behind his ribs, eyewash empty. The eyewash in 3B was the portable kind. Clear bottle in a green cradle, a little white spout that made water arc toward an eye. He kept a marker line on the plastic, fill to here, because a line turns a chore into a promise. The bottle had been full last Thursday. He remembered refilling it himself and tapping the side with 2 fingers like a person who doesn't trust a gauge and prefers his own knuckles. At 10:30, after the nurse took the 2 dizzy students, and the room sat with itself, he lifted the bottle and it was light, in a way that says yesterday has already taken its portion, not low, not half, dry like a throat after a cough. He felt the small shame teachers feel when a safety piece has drifted 1 square off the board. He made the plan he always made, refill after lunch. He wrote eyewash in his pocket notebook and drew a box next to it to make it a task he could check. Boxes help a person who wants to do right. He did not tell the nurse yet. He wasn't hiding. He was triaging his pride. Downstairs, the night warden, Peter Cho, signed in at the metal desk that was too cold in winter and too hot in summer. He was the kind of man schools learn to rely on without fanfare. Buttoned flannel, a pencil behind his ear, a face that looked like it listened even when he was alone. He walked his first loop through the building as afternoon leaned toward evening. He liked to greet rooms with his shoulders first. Classrooms feel that. He let the gym smell be the gym smell, rubber and effort. He let the cafeteria be its honest self, yeast and sanitizer. When he came to the science wing, he slowed his feet a notch. Science rooms have their own voices, a layered set of breaths and hums and little tugs on the air. He stood in 3B's doorway and didn't turn the lights on. Emergency fixtures threw their soft squares across benches and glass. He took 2 steps in and let the air speak to him. There it was. A copper note at the back of the throat, not a sting, not a warning, a clean penny warmed by a thumb. He knew that smell from other places, shops where metal gets polished, rooms where old radios sit with their backs off. The fire story made sense of it. He nodded, not to a person, but to the idea of residue. He filed the sensation under a number in his head so he could compare it later without asking his heart to remember a feeling. He looked at the hood. The sash was where the tape said it should be. The crack caught light like a pale thread. He looked at the eyewash cradle. He didn't lift the bottle. He looked at the meniscus stain where water had sat last week and the dry edge below the marker line. He circled 3B eyewash refill on the custodial checklist with a stubby red pencil, 1 circle, then a second, then a third, with a small arrow like a friend tugging a sleeve. He didn't write urgent. He knew that word got ignored as often as it got honored. In the nurse's office, a ledger lived on a clipboard. It was the kind of book that forgives pencils. She kept the straightest columns in the building. At 10:14 that morning, 2 names had landed in the same minute with the same word, dizzy, written in 2 different hands. She had seen that before in other contexts, lunchrooms where 2 kids copy a joke, hallways where yawns catch like a flu. She gave them water, watched their pupils, counted their heartbeats with fingers pressed to their wrists like she was measuring a small drum. At 10:28 she wrote return to class and underlined the time because underlining is how she thanks a minute for behaving. By late afternoon the building's light changed keys. The tall firs outside threw their slow bars across the linoleum. Mr. Klein came back from a copy run with an armful of handouts and an ache in his shoulders that meant he had spent the day being careful. He set his stack down, rinsed the beaker that had sat under the towel's edge, looked again at the hairline crack in the sash, like you look at a scratch on a windshield, the kind that doesn't bother you until you imagine rain at night. He wiped the hood lip with a clean rag. He reached for the eyewash bottle, cursed in the quiet way teachers learn to curse when rooms are empty, and found the gallon jug in the prep room. He filled the bottle, set it in the cradle, drew the line again with the marker, and wrote the date in small numbers you could only read if you cared. Peter made his second loop at 8:30. The school's night had settled on its haunches. He liked this part. The building felt like it trusted him. He passed 3B again. He did not plan to stop, then stopped the way you do when a door you know well looks the same but feels different. He opened it by a hand's width. The room breathed at him, cool, layered, nothing loud. The penny smell sat a shade stronger than earlier, the way a word sounds steadier when a speaker repeats it with a little more confidence. He closed the door and went downstairs to the meter room because numbers tell truths that air can only suggest. The weekend meter lived on the wall like a quiet drum with a needle. It kept a slow record of the building's power heartbeat when people were home. Peter wrote Friday's slope, Saturday's line, Sunday's hill, Monday's return. He knew what normal looked like, a gentle curve where the boiler kicked, a small rise when custodians ran scrubbers, flatness where classrooms slept. He looked at Sunday night's rise around 8 and wrote the tick next to it, a small lift where there should have been none. He didn't dramatize it. He could have blamed the freezer defrost in the cafeteria, or a janitor's radio left on a charger, or any number of small mechanical habits that use a sip. He didn't assume. He wrote the number like he was putting away silverware, quietly, to be ready. Monday morning said it would be ordinary and tried its best. The assistant principal, Ms. Ray, walked the hall with her legal pad, the kind of person who wrote straight without lines. She had the face that made teenagers adjust their shirt hem without remembering why. She stopped at 3B because she had read the word contained in Mr. Klein's report and did not trust it to mean finished. She looked at the hood and read the taped sign. She pushed 2 fingers gently against the sash and felt it give and stop at the tape line like a gate respecting a stone. She read the copy of the maintenance ticket that Mr. Klein had smartly taped inside the cabinet door. Hood 3B, sash fractured, back-ordered, ETA unknown. She wrote the vendor name on her pad, Harbour Systems, and put a dot next to it. Dots were for phone calls later, the kind where you say, the firm, friendly sentence adults save for service desks. Help me, help you help my kids. She glanced at the eyewash. The bottle was full now. A black marker line marked, fill to here. Above it, a small pencil tick she didn't recognize, very faint, sat like a bird on a wire. She smiled at that. Mr. Klein had made his promised line. Someone else had added a check. Pencil is a kind staff use when they want to place a finger on time without leaving a bruise. She made a mental note to ask who was using pencil. 2 doors down, the lab assistant, Nora Platt, hand-wrote labels with a steadiness that would have made a printing press jealous. She'd been here longer than both principals combined, the kind of person who can find a missing condenser coil with her eyes closed. She loved rooms in the healthy way by keeping them ready. When Ms. Ray asked how 3B looked after the scare, Nora said, "It looks exactly like Mr. Klein left it, neat as a lesson plan." She didn't mention Sundays. Why would she? Sundays were home. Church in the morning, a small pan of rolls proofing on the counter by the window, a crossword folded to the right shaded squares. She had a key to the prep room and a key to 3B. She wore them on a thin chain under her sweater because lanyards felt like whistles to her, and she'd rather look like a librarian than a referee. In Mr. Klein's room, the class settled again into the everyday. He put a fresh paragraph on the chalkboard about exothermic reactions and kept his voice mild. He made a small joke about contained and finished, how they are cousins but not twins, and let the kids feel smart for noticing the difference. Their laughter was friendly. He liked those small repairs. A class repairs itself after a scare by acting like itself on purpose. Around noon, the nurse stopped by, ledger under her arm, not to scold or soothe, just to tell the truth a room might need. "Too dizzy at 10:14, she said, and kept her tone even. Water helped. One looked more scared than dizzy. She drew a tiny square with her pencil by the time in her own ledger, a symbol no one else would understand, and that was fine. She asked about the eyewash. Mr. Klein told the truth, dry after, filled now, and the apology arrived in his throat on time. She didn't make it big. She touched the bottle with 2 fingers and said, "Line is a promise." He nodded. He had written that on his lab rules last month and believed it even more today. By dismissal, a thin rain began to write itself down the window like a student who sets letters a little too close together. The hood hummed its old note. The crack wore light thin as a thread. The taped sign kept its quiet order. Ms. Ray called Harbour Systems and held for a human, while the recorded voice asked the wrong questions. When a man finally picked up, she used her sunlight voice and read the relevant sentence from the safety code into the space between them. Cracked sash on active hood, student use, back-ordered panel, request for expedite. The man said words that lived in shipping warehouses. Q. Estimate? We'll see. She wrote his name anyway. Names help later. By evening, the building had given back most of its noises to the night warden. Peter made his rounds with the same even step. He stopped by the meter room again because the habit had already started to form, and habits help a person hear patterns. He copied Monday's slow line with a small nod. He took his pencil upstairs and on the custodial checklist put one more circle around 3B eyewash refill, even though the bottle sat full. It wasn't the water he was circling. It was the idea. If a job keeps getting missed, you circle it until your hand is tired, and then you make the job part of the Monday that follows you around. Room 3B went to sleep like a cat that had been scolded, and now wanted to prove it had never done anything wrong. The smell of pennies thinned into the regular school breath. Paper and soap, ghost chalk, old floor wax, giving back the day's heat. The accident report lay flat in the principal's in-tray with the word contained, where some other people would have used lucky. The maintenance ticket sat under a paperweight shaped like a trout in the facilities office, back-ordered, staring from the middle of the page like a small thorn. The nurse ledger closed over the 2 names at 10:14 like a pond surface that never makes a speech about what it holds. Everything was documented. Everything was in its folder. The part that wasn't finished, no folder could hold that. The room would keep that language for Sunday nights when the hall lights went soft and the building tried out its private words. On Sunday, at 8:47 p.m, Peter would pause outside 3B the way a person pauses at a door before visiting a friend who is almost well. The hood would hum a little too eagerly. The room would smell like copper under a thumb. The weekend meter downstairs would lift its needle in a small shrug around the same time. The word contained would still be on the page. The week would be waiting to show its other hand. That is how a small fire keeps talking, not with flames, but with careful people, faint smells, pencil ticks, and a cracked pane that invites the wrong fingers to slide it an inch higher than the tape allows. Contained is a promise, finished is a practice. The difference between those two is where the human part lives, and that is the part that wakes you a little after midnight and asks, quietly, not cruelly, did we really put every piece back where it belongs? Sunday nights in old schools have a weight that weekday nights don't. The clocks still tick, but slower, like they've put on sweaters. The heating plant works without hurry. Doors remember to be doors and stay shut. Even stairwells soften their echo. A person walking a hallway at that hour can hear what a building actually thinks of itself. Peter Cho liked that part of the job. He didn't tell people he liked it. He just showed up a few minutes early on Sundays to give the place a chance to speak before he started being purely practical. Trash, floors, locks, lights. He carried a small spiral pad, the cheap kind that tears clean, and a pencil he sharpened down to honest wood. He wrote small, left margin straight, numbers on the right where he could see them without squinting. At 8:47 p.m, the first Sunday after the fire, he paused outside room 3B without deciding to. Pause is a sense in the body, not a plan. The corridor lights gave the floor an even wash. The emergency fixtures in rooms made soft squares on benches and glass. He opened the door just a hand's width and stood, like a person at a screened porch, letting night air go both ways. Nothing loud, no hiss, no pop. Just the room's usual low electric breath and, there, at the back of the throat, a penny note, faint and convincing. Not the clean sting of solvent, not the lemon of cleaner. Copper, warmed. He didn't step in. He didn't want to own the room's air if the room hadn't offered. He shut the door, wrote 2047 3B, copper, eyed pennies faint, and walked the length of the corridor to the stair, down to the meter room with the slow drum on the wall. The weekend meter had its own personality, needle steady, a small quiver when the boiler woke, a shy nudge if someone ran a machine that shouldn't. Peter looked at the thin red line and saw a small hill, where Sundays are supposed to be prairies. The little rise sat right around 8:45 to 9:15, a polite bump. He wrote the reading, underlined the time, and drew a pencil dot next to it, his way of telling Monday. Peter, this dot isn't panic, it's something to bring to coffee. Monday morning wore the face of ordinary on purpose. Ms. Ray, the assistant principal, believed in ordinary as medicine. She walked the hall with her legal pad and her pen that wrote lines so straight the pad could have been ruled. She stopped at 3B because she'd read Mr. Klein's accident report cover to cover, contained, low sash, back-ordered, and she didn't like how the word back-ordered sat on a page, like a patient with a blanket over its knees. She pushed 2 fingers against the sash and felt the stop at the tape line. She checked the eyewash bottle, full, black marker line, and above it a ghost pencil scratch that looked like someone had set an intention. She smiled at that. Pencil is how staff place their fingers on time. At lunch, the nurse showed her the ledger. 2 names at 10:14 on fire day, both with the word dizzy written like the same bell in 2 hands. The nurse hadn't underlined, she had put a tiny square in the margin, her private symbol for watch if twins appear. Ms. Ray respected symbols that weren't for everyone. "Anything else?" she asked. No symptoms after. No redness, the nurse said. One of them cried a little while, breathing slow. That's not a symptom, that's a person. Ms. Ray nodded. She liked that sentence. She carried it without making a note. Not everything belongs on paper. Nora Platt, the lab assistant, was the kind of person rooms love. Hands steady, labels neat, keys worn smooth by trust. She kept 3B in supplies and in shape. Her key lived on a thin chain under her sweater. She touched it sometimes without meaning to, same way some people touch a locket. When Ms. Ray stopped by the prep room and asked how 3B looked after the scare, Nora said, "Like Mr. Klein left it, he's careful." Then, almost apologetically, "I told him again to let me refill the eyewash when he's got hands full. He said he had it. He meant it." No mention of Sundays. Sundays were church, rolls and crosswords. The room didn't yet have her name on anything the week wanted to say. Back in 3B, Mr. Klein turned the class towards small chemistry that behaves. He wrote exothermic in a patient hand and talked about how the word contained is a promise that requires rehearsal, not a talisman that wards off trouble. He made the kids repeat it back to him. Contained is a promise, and they liked being in on the grown-ups' phrase. He tucked the nurse's sentence in his pocket for later. One needed breathing, not rinsing. By midweek, the building had calmed the way rooms do after a scare, by returning to being boring and letting boring feel good. That calm hid a small rhythm Peter could feel in his shoes. On Sunday number 2, he paused again at 3B at 8:50, almost the same minute without trying. He cracked the door and stood like he did last time. The penny note was there again, exactly as faint, exactly as confident. He closed the door and made a smaller note in his pad. Faint copper. Same. He went to the meter room and saw the same polite hill at the same slice of night. He wrote the reading and circled the time, not hard, but enough to make the figure feel textured. He liked little textures like that. They kept your attention kind without asking for alarm. Monday, Ms. Ray returned to the room between first and second period. She pressed 2 fingers to the sash again. It moved like a well-behaved window, stopped where the tape told it to stop. She touched the eyewash bottle and felt the weight of full. She looked at her pencil tick from last time and saw the meniscus a thumb's width below it. Not much. Enough. No puddle, no drip. Either someone had used it and not told her, which would have come with Nurse Ledger ink, or someone had refilled it before and left it light, or someone had been in the room and tipped it. She drew a tiny arrow next to her pencil tick and wrote a small date in numbers, only she would read later without squinting. She wasn't building a case, she was building a timeline. She checked badge swipes on the new side entrance to the science wing because she liked to ask the building to tell her who touched it. The printout gave her polite red lines. Saturday, custodial master, 1 in, 1 out. Sunday, no badge, no badge. Which meant either no one came, or someone propped the door, or a key had been used that never talked to a computer. Keys are older than computers and more patient. The list of who had metal keys to 3B was short. Klein, Platt, the head custodian, Peter's nightmaster. An assistant coach had borrowed a set 3 months ago for a faucet in the locker room and hadn't returned it yet. He was loved by everyone who had knees and an old pipe. Ms. Ray wrote his name with a little smiley face next to it so she would remember to ask nicely and not make it a sermon. That week, Mr. Klein did his safety checks with almost extra calm, like a driver who touched the brakes earlier than usual. He opened the flammable cabinet to count. He ran his hand under the hood lip to feel for drips that shouldn't. In a drawer, he found 2 thin copper strips with bright edges, the ends snipped at an angle, the kind of neat supplies people keep for little circuits, and etched plates. He didn't do electronics, he did solutions and salts and gas evolution in test tubes that hissed politely. He set the strips on the bench, looked at them, thought of the smell he couldn't name until someone else called it pennies. He put the strips back. He had the thought about Nora's old science fair nameplates like a small bird that landed and left immediately. She used to etch on Sundays sometimes 2 years ago, before the principal said consumables would have to be approved, before the PTA partnered with a trophy shop downtown. He didn't tie the thought to this week. He didn't want to. She was careful. She loved rooms. He respected both. Saturday slid by in rain. Sunday number 3 arrived a few minutes later on Peter's wristwatch because he had eaten late. He didn't need the watch. His legs knew when 8:47 was near. He walked the long length of the second-floor corridor to 3B and opened the door the exact same hand's width. The penny note was stronger, still not a warning, but not shy. The hood hummed. He listened longer. Hoods have that low pitch that tells you when the sash is where it belongs. This note sat a hair high, like a singer reaching for a harmony. He closed the door, took 3 slow steps back, and stood. People will tell you you can't hear the difference in a machine like that from outside. People who say that don't do rounds. He walked the stairs down to the meter room and watched the needle do its courteous climb at 8:50 and lower itself back to 0 slope at 9:15. He drew the small hill on his pad, a curve that would have looked like nothing to anyone else, and wrote a third date under the other 2, then connected them with a faint bridge, left to right. He did not know why he liked drawing bridges between numbers. He liked it anyway. He told himself the cafeteria freezer could run a weird defrost cycle, or the boiler could like doing a little dance in that quarter hour, or a radio charger could be greedy. He also told himself that hoods don't hum higher unless the sash is higher, or someone's hands are in the space on the wrong side of tape. Ms. Ray decided to stop letting Sunday be a private mystery. On Tuesday, she asked Peter to walk with her after last bell. No audience, no announcement, just 2 people doing the thing buildings prefer, going to the place gently and seeing it. She had on the shoes that made no sound on wax. He had his ring of keys that said, "I can open anything without threatening to." They did not go to 3B first. They walked the library and breathed the book glue. They checked the auditorium doors for their lazy latch. They stood in the stairwell a full minute without speaking, which is how you let a building tell you whether it's hiding anything in a corner. When they reached the lab wing, Ms. Ray stopped and let the hallway show her its rectangles of light and quiet. The hood sang. It was a good machine. The note was steady, respectable. The sign said, "Low, sash only." The crack in the glass caught the fluorescent like a vein. She opened the door with her hand low on the knob. Teachers know to move as if skittish cats live in rooms. Inside, 3B sat like a photograph. Benches orderly, chalkboard sentence still faint from 4th period, goggles in their wire bins. The hood hummed with its faint, higher pitch. The sash was a little too high. You don't measure that with a ruler. You measure it with the hair on your wrist. Ms. Ray put 2 fingers on the metal lip and pressed down to the tape line. The note dropped a tone, and both of them felt the room relax a notch. She looked at the bench. One beaker wore a pale blue ring at the lip, a copper sulfate kiss that dries into sky. 2 copper strips lay tucked under a composition notebook that hadn't been there at noon. She didn't reach. She had learned that if you let a room see you as a person who doesn't always touch, the room will hand you more than if you grab. A small sound came from the prep room. Not a clatter. Something placed, metal on wood. The exhale a person makes when the weight of a container leaves their hands. Ms. Ray didn't startle. She did the cat voice. "Nora?" The doorway filled with a woman in a cardigan with a rag in her hand. and the open face of someone who knows she's in a story she didn't plan to tell today. Nora looked at the two of them, then at the hood, then at the bottle with the pencil mark, then back to Ms. Ray. Embarrassment, relief, and the muscle memory of explanation crossed her face in a quick, decent order. "I only use it a few minutes," she said instantly. Honesty loves speed. "Sundays, when no one is here, the kids see the crack and copy me if I do it Tuesdays. I thought, no lesson around a broken pane." She lifted the rag the way people lift a white flag, more habit than meaning, etching the winter science nameplate, the last brass ones, until we decide what the trophies look like. "I had scrap copper from Mr. Binder, print shop." Her words lined themselves up without defense, like tools laid on a bench by a person who wants you to see that each has a place. "I keep the sash low. Sometimes I lift it to reach. I refill the eyewash after." Her eyes went to the pencil tick. She winced, closed her eyes a second, opened them. "I forgot last week." Peter shifted with all the dignity a person can bring to a moment like that, hands in pockets, weight on heels, gaze neutral. He let Ms. Ray be the voice. She chose a tone that rooms like, a firm that behaves like care. "We don't use a cracked sash," she said. "Not you, not kids, even if you'd be safe. The bottle has to be full for the accident you can't schedule, and you cannot be in here unofficial, even if your unofficial is cleaner than our official." Nora nodded, head tipped like she was listening to a song she'd heard before and was ready to hum along this time. "I didn't want it to go away," she said, and the sentence that had been hiding in the walls came out where it could be seen. The plaques. The kids liked seeing their own names on metal cut in their room, not from a shop 3 bus rides away. It made the fair feel like ours. She looked at her hands. "I let a nice habit outrun a rule. I'm sorry." She wasn't pleading. She was naming her own heart so they wouldn't have to guess the contents. They sat on lab stools that squeaked the way prep stools squeak when the rubber feet get older than the floor wants them to be. Ms. Ray asked practical questions as if they were as sacred as apologies. "What solutions? We can ask Harbour to move. We can pause etching until the pane is replaced. We can use the metal shop's ventilation during school hours. We can ask the PTA for 3 brass plates if it truly matters this season." They built a list on paper. Paper turns heat into motion. Ms. Ray asked the one fairness question left. "Were you here during the fire?" Nora shook her head at once. "Morning is church, afternoon is rolls." "I came after sunset, to etch while no one would lift the sash because I was doing it. I smelled the acetone memory when I opened the door. I wiped the bench and put things the way Mr. Klein keeps them. I didn't leave a note. I didn't want to sound like I was scolding or confessing. I will leave notes now." She looked at Peter. "And I forgot that your meter is a witness with a better memory than me." Peter smiled with the humility of a man who likes a good sentence and doesn't want to own it. "Meter likes being thanked," he said. They turned the hood off. Not because the machine had sinned, because letting a room be still teaches everybody what normal is supposed to sound like. Ms. Ray slid the copper strips into a manila envelope and wrote, "Hold on it," with the important block letters schools learn in their bones. She wrote Harbour Systems on an index card with the code section beside it. She asked Nora for her key, not forever, just for a reset. Nora slid the chain over her head like a small ritual. "I'll sign it out during hours," she said. "I won't play at being useful after hours." The 3 of them left the hallway with the quiet of people, leaving a chapel after service. Not hushed by fear, hushed by agreement. Monday morning, the custodial checklist had a single neat circle next to 3B eyewash refill and a clean check. No arrows, no 3 rings of frustration. The nurse ledger returned to sore throats, a nosebleed, a jammed finger. Peter went to the meter room, Sunday out of habit for a month after, and every Sunday the needle lay flat at 8:47 like a pond that had decided to keep its glass for itself. He wrote flat twice, then stopped writing. Not everything needs ink to be real. Ms. Ray called Harbour Systems with her good pen ready. She got the right person on the second day. She said the code, the room, the word student. The tone on the other end changed from warehouse to calendar. A man with a whistle in his pocket and a suction cup in his toolbox came on Friday, removed the cracked sash like a dentist removing a tooth without making a patient feel shabby about their enamel, and set the new pane with a confidence that made the hood hum like a machine that had gotten to be itself again. He left a carbon copy. Ms. Ray wrote replaced and the date on the maintenance ticket and slid the yellow part into the folder with the satisfaction of someone who had traded a thorn for a stitch. Nora wrote on the prep room whiteboard in careful block letters. Etching paused until Hood certified thank you and put the manila envelope with copper strips into Ms. Ray's inbox with a small underlined hold. She told Mr. Klein the truth in a hallway between bells. He didn't scold, he said thank you. The way people say thanks when their own pride has been heavy and someone else lights part of it. Mr. Klein added 2 slides to his safety talk the next day, a photo of a cracked sash with tape and the caption, "Tape is a warning, not permission," and a photo of an eyewash bottle with a black marker line and the caption, "This line is a promise." He didn't say because Nora, he said because us. Kids can hear the difference. They listen longer when adults point at themselves. The Sunday smell went away. The weekend meter lay calm. Habit slid back into its proper place, under rule, not over it. One small haunting remained on paper, the 2 names at 10:14 with the word dizzy written twice. But that haunting had lost its teeth. It lived as a reminder that contained works best when it sends messengers into the rest of the week. Check the meter, check the bottle, lower the glass, ask the person with the keys what they're doing on days without bells. Years later, if you told the story in a room lit by a single lamp, the disturbing part wouldn't be fire or smoke. It would be this: how easily a room can keep a good habit unofficial, how politely a meter can try to tell you so, how a cracked pane invites fingers to lift just a little, how a bottle can sit light under a mark and dare you to notice. The human horror isn't that a ghost used a hood, it's that people who care sometimes forget that care has to wear a badge too. And the relief comes from people who notice faint copper at the back of the throat and a small hill on a dial and decide to put names next to minutes until the room promises with its hum that it belongs to the living again. There are 2 honest ways to find a person in a building. Ask their name or ask the building who touched it. Ms. Ray believed in both, but she preferred to start where walls keep their own ledger, locks, meters, and the quiet machines that record without opinion. People tell stories with weather in them. Hardware leaves out the sky. Monday arrived with a steady drizzle and the particular grey that makes windows feel like they're thinking. Ms. Ray set a fresh legal pad in front of her and wrote 3 short lines, each on its own. Keys, hood, eyewash. She underlined hood twice. Then she lifted the phone and did the call that changes how calendars behave. Harbour Systems, sash replacement. She spoke in the tone that gets you moved from estimate unknown to let me see what I can do. The man on the other end promised nothing he couldn't deliver. He promised to call before lunch. She set the receiver down and wrote his first name in the margin. Names matter later. While the phone waited to ring, she built a small stack of paper you could carry in one hand. The maintenance ticket, sash fractured, back-ordered, the custodial checklist with 3B eyewash refill circled 3 times, and then checked. The nurse ledger photocopy of 10:14 on fire day, with Dizzy written twice, Peter's neat meter sheet with the 3 little hills on 3 Sundays, and the badge swipe printout from the lab wing door that kept writing no badge exactly when you wished it wouldn't. It wasn't much. That's how most truths begin. Quiet proof objects like thumbtacks holding a map to the wall. She started with keys because keys make adults honest. They have weight, and weight invites good posture. She invited 4 people to her office one by one: the head custodian, Mr. Klein, the assistant coach with the borrowed ring, and Nora. The head custodian arrived with the look of someone who measures days in what got fixed, not what got said. Her master key lived on a leather belt that looked as indestructible as her patience. She unhooked the ring and laid it on the blotter like a small animal that trusted her. "Never leaves the belt," she said. It wasn't defensive, it was procedure with dignity. Ms. Ray nodded and signed the little box on her pad that meant saw it, believed it. Mr. Klein set his single classroom key down with a teacher's care, exact placement, teeth away from the edge so it wouldn't scratch the desk, the unconscious choreography of someone who returns tools to their right drawer. "Lives in my pocket or the desk drawer under the grade book," he said. "If it leaves the room, it's because my hand left with it." He tried to smile and couldn't. The week had built him a small stack inside, too, contained, Dizzy, empty bottle, back-ordered. He didn't need another pile, not one with a key on top. Ms. Ray checked her box for saw it, believed it again. The assistant coach showed up with apology ahead of him, like a dog that knows it stole bread. He produced a ring from the bottom of a gym office drawer, tokens of a good intention stretched too thin, 2 custodial keys and 1 lab key on a bent hardware store carabiner. "Sync job," he said, meant to return. Ms. Ray laughed once, the kind of laugh that eases the right muscles. "Return now," she said, and wrote the date beside his name and drew a smiley face so she would remember in spring that the man deserved a kind tone, even if the policy didn't. Nora came last. She wore a cardigan the colour of notebook paper and the thin chain with her key tucked under. When Ms. Ray asked to see it, Nora lifted the chain over her head with 2 hands and placed the key on the desk with the care one gives to a word that belongs to both speaker and listener. "I keep it on me," she said. "Old habit." Ms. Ray believed her, not because the sentence was persuasive, but because the room had already taught her whose hands knew where things belonged. Keys accounted for, Ms. Ray turned to the other way of asking a building who touched it. Be there when it would rather not be watched. Sunday had made its small case. She decided to answer it with the simplest ceremony: show up, walk, listen. No audience, no radios, no clipboard parade. "Tonight?" she asked Peter. "I'll meet you at 7:30. Peter nodded, wrote 19:30 Ray, walk on his little spiral pad, and didn't make a speech about it. Night staff understand that some work lives better without witnesses. The day did its daytime work in the meantime: bells, lockers, the chalk scrape that sounds like a pencil's cousin. Mr. Klein's classes practiced being calmer than they felt. He added a sentence to his lecture: "Tape is a warning, not permission," and said it like a man who had written the sentence for himself first. The nurse refilled her ice pack bin, wiped the counter, and fed the ledger 3 sore throats, 1 splinter, and a note about a child whose stomach made noises that had nothing to do with chemicals. Peter made his afternoon rounds and, out of habit, pressed a finger to the hood lip in 3B to feel the pull. On, steady, a note he could hum now if someone asked. At 7:21 p.m, the building had its jacket off and its slippers on. The late light threw long rectangles that made even empty rooms look busy. Peter was waiting at the front desk with his keyring and a thermos that smelled faintly of barley tea. Ms. Ray came in from the rain with her hair damp at the temples and a pair of shoes that apologized to flaws rather than argued with them. They didn't announce their route, they let their feet make it. They walked the library first. Ms. Ray traced a finger along the top of a shelf and came back clean. Someone had dusted with pride. She made a mental note to thank the person by name. In the auditorium, Peter checked the fire door that liked to believe it was shut when it wasn't. He listened to the hinge and then pressed the panic bar 3 times until it learned to return with more confidence. Little lessons like that are the private devotionals of night staff. They climbed the second-floor stairs and stopped in the landing to listen. Stairwells confess. If a door is propped, if a window is open a finger's width, if a machine down the hall is lying, the stairwell tells you in a version of echo. Tonight it held only the room's own breath, the good kind it makes after cleaning, when wax still remembers mops. They reached the lab wing and stood before 3B. The hallway speaker hummed its small electricity. Ms. Ray put her hand on the knob in that low, firm way she had. No rattle, no hurry. She opened the door and let stillness make the first move. The hood was on, which wasn't wrong. Teachers often left it so to keep the room's air honest. The pitch, to both their ears, sat a hair high. The sash, familiar sign, low, sash only, was raised a notch above the tape line. Not recklessly, the sort of notch that happens when good hands reach in to do one small thing for just a second. Ms. Ray stepped in and pressed 2 fingers on the sash and brought it down to the tape. The hood's note dropped to shade, and both of them exhaled without deciding to. She scanned the benches. The day had left its innocent evidence, a chalk smudge on a sleeve of a stool, a water ring, a brown paper towel left folded, with the neatness of a student who thinks of teachers later. On the nearest bench, a beaker showed a delicate blue skin at the lip, copper sulfate telling on itself with the dignity of an old stain. Tucked under a composition notebook lay 2 thin copper strips, edges bright, ends snipped at a precise angle. She didn't touch them. People believe touch is proof. She believed patience was proof. A small sound arrived from the prep room. A lid settled on a jar, tin on wood, the kind of sound someone makes when they aren't hiding but aren't performing either. Ms. Ray turned her head like you turn toward a skittish cat in the doorway. "Nora," she said, neither surprised nor scolding. Nora stood framed by shelves of labelled jars, ethanol, vinegar, sodium chloride, rags in one hand, her other hand empty and honest. Her face did 3 quick things that make a person decent. It registered embarrassment, it registered relief, and then it registered the urge to tell the truth before being asked. "I only use it a few minutes," she said. "Sundays, when it's quiet." She gestured toward the hood with the rag, a little flag of habit. "I didn't want the kids to see me working under the cracked sash and make a bad copy. I thought, do it when nobody's watching." Peter put his hands in his pockets and looked at the floor with kind attention. He understood the moment was between 2 women who kept the school safe in different ways. Ms. Ray didn't step closer. She matched the distance like one does with a skittish animal, affirming, not trapping. "What are you making?" she asked. "Nameplates," Nora said, as if the word might have a tone she needed to defend. "For the Winter Science Fair display box. The trophies come from the shop now. They're nice. They're not ours." She lifted her chin the tiniest bit, not to be brave, but to keep her voice from falling into apology. "Mr. Binder at the print shop gave me scrap copper when they switched signage. I etched the names, light acid, resist, polish, 10 minutes in the hood, 5 to rinse. I keep the sash low, mostly. Sometimes I lift to reach." Her eyes went to the eyewash bottle, to the pencil tick Ms. Ray had drawn. She closed her eyes once, as if listening to a scolding she had earned and preferred to deliver to herself. I forgot the refill last week. What time Sundays? Ms. Ray asked. Practical beats anger in rooms like this. After evening service, Nora said. 8:30, 8:45. I bring the radio from the prep room in case the building needs to say something. I don't sign in because... She stopped. The sentence, because I know better, hovered in the space like breath on glass. Ms. Ray chose the tone she used for kids who broke rules for reasons that weren't mean, firm enough to hold the line, soft enough to let shame find the door on its own. We don't use a hood with a cracked sash, she said. Not you, not students, even if you are careful. The bottle is a promise, not a decoration. It must be full when a tired kid rubs an eye without asking permission first, and you cannot be here unofficially. Your careful is not the same as policy's careful. Nora nodded the way people nod when they have already had the conversation with themselves. I didn't want the plaque to go away, she said. And now the heart of it arrived, in a sentence that gave kindness its true size. The kids like seeing their names cut in their room by a person who cared about their room. When we started sending trophies out, it felt like the names moved farther away. The plaque kept something near. She looked at the copper strips under the notebook. I let that feeling outrun the rule. Peter breathed out through his nose, the sound night people make when a puzzle moves to a new shelf where it belongs. He did not say meter. He did not need to. Ms. Ray looked at the hood, then at Nora. Tonight we turn it off, she said. Tomorrow we call harbour and push. For now, etching pauses. We will find a way to bring the names home that doesn't ask you to borrow Sunday, and we will refill the bottle in the morning, not as a confession, but as routine. They sat on stools that squeaked the sound humans have made with schools, since people decided stools were better than standing. Ms. Ray asked the questions that collapse fog into steps. Could the metal shop's ventilation handle the etching during school hours? Would the PTA fund 3 brass plates if it meant lifing the strange Sunday minute off a room? Could the nameplates be letterpressed in the art room on thick card for this year and not lose dignity? They built a list. Lists are hard on shame and easy on progress. Then she asked the fairness question, not because she doubted, but because fairness leaves fewer shadows. Were you here on fire day? Nora's answer was out before the question landed. No, morning service, then rolls. I came after sunset. I could smell the acetone memory when I opened the door. I wiped the bench out of habit. I put the eyewash back, badly, apparently. I didn't leave a note. I didn't want to make Mr. Klein feel watched, and I didn't want to make the principal think the hood was mislogged. I will leave notes now. She turned to Peter with a rueful smile. I also forgot your meter is a better Catholic than me, confesses everything. Peter smiled a square, modest smile. Meter likes being thanked, he said. The sentence made a home in the room. They closed the sash with ceremony, a hand on the glass, a hand on the lip, tape line respected, pitch dropping into honest. Ms. Ray switched the hood off and listened to the fan wind down, a sound like a long breath finally let go. She slid the copper strips into a manila envelope and wrote, "Hold," in the kind of block letters that erase ambiguity. She placed the envelope in her folder like a stone that tethers paper to earth. "Bring me your chain," she said to Nora, not as punishment, as ritual. "We'll sign the key out during hours this week." Nora slid the thin loop over her head and set the key on the desk surface where students have slid late passes for a decade. It made a tiny metal kiss when it landed. They left the room without turning on the main lights. They wanted the hallway to absorb what they had decided without fanfare. Ms. Ray and Peter walked the stairs down. In the meter room, Peter watched the needle. The Sunday hill did not build this time. The line lay flat. He put a dot on the sheet anyway, not as data, as gratitude. The fix was practical and a little bit beautiful, the way good fixes are. Ms. Ray called Harbour Systems again in the morning and traded a code citation and the word student for the thing that moves hands, priority. The pane was promised for Friday. She phoned the metal shop teacher and asked if his ventilation could host copper etching in daylight. "We can make it a demonstration," he said, secretly delighted to be useful in a way that smelled like work, not meetings. She asked the art teacher if letterpress on thick card would dignify names this year. The art teacher lit up like someone had asked her to be herself in public. She wrote a short memo that avoided blame the way a good driver avoids potholes. Room 3B, hood sash cracked, replacement scheduled. Friday. Hood off until replaced. Eyewash, Monday. Refill is standing order. Unofficial after-hours use. Paused. If you need the space, ask. I will make room. She taped the memo inside the door, instead of on the outside where students make puzzles out of policy. She told Mr. Klein in person. He closed his eyes for a breath and opened them lighter. He had been carrying a week on 2 shoulders. She took a bag off without making him list the contents. Nora wrote on the prep room whiteboard in careful, calm letters. Etching paused until Hood certified, "Thank you." She brought the envelope of copper to Ms. Ray and set it in the inbox like a loaf of bread. She kept her chain off for a week and signed the key during hours, an outward sign of an inward promise to herself. She apologized to Mr. Klein in a single sentence that didn't force him to comfort her. He said, "Thank you," rather than "it's okay," which told her he understood the difference between forgiveness and permission. Peter added 1 line to the weekend checklist because he believes in teaching paper new habits. Under boiler check, he wrote, "Note meter anomaly." He didn't need it anymore. The line would probably lie flat now, but he liked giving the future a place to put its eyebrows when something lifted them. On Friday, the Harbour Systems man arrived with a new sash and the calm of someone who repairs things that people stare at too long. He whistled a tune from the radio while he worked, the kind of melody that doesn't argue with silence. He lifted the cracked pane like a dentist lifts a tooth that has done its time without shaming the tooth for breaking. He set the new glass and ran a hand along the track until the sash moved like a promise that expected to be kept. He initialed the work order with a flourish as if he were signing a guestbook. Ms. Ray wrote "replaced" and the date on the maintenance ticket and put the yellow copy in the folder with the quiet satisfaction of someone removing a splinter you've tolerated for days. The Sunday smell stopped. The hood's pitch held even, and if you stood at the door, you could feel the slight outward breath that says a room has nothing to hide. The eyewash bottle sat heavy at the mark, line made into promise made into habit. The weekend meter laid its long, low line, a horizon drawn with a steady hand. Peter still checked it at 8:47 for 2 more Sundays because humans like to prove to themselves that peace isn't a trick. There was 1 more walk to take because endings deserve feet. Ms. Ray and Peter met again in the hallway the next week at the same minute out of courtesy to the story. They stood outside 3B without opening it. Sometimes you look through the small wired glass instead. The room was a square of dark with an honest hum. Ms. Ray said, "Rooms talk," and Peter answered, "We promise to listen," and neither remembered who said it first. They turned and walked the long length of the school where the floor knows their steps, and the building settled an inch and decided to keep this shape. The keys? Accounted for. The hood? Whole. The bottle? Full. The Sunday? Returned to being what Sundays in schools should be. Flat on the meter, quiet in the air, nobody's secret workshop. The disturbing part, the human part, the part that keeps you awake in the kind way and then lets you sleep, is small and precise. How easily love of a craft slips off the clock, how a cracked pane invites just one notch higher from careful hands, how a bottle can sit light under a pencil line and dare a good person not to notice, how a meter downstairs, which loves nobody, can still be a friend. When people say haunted lab, they want smoke and knocks. The better haunting is this: a Sunday at 8:47, a faint scent of copper, a hum pitched a hair too high, a key taken off a chain and laid gently on a desk, a woman who loved names enough to keep them close, and a building that learned to ask for daylight and signatures before it gives up its air. That's the kind that teaches you to live with rooms instead of inside them. And it is why, when the new sash slid like a breath and the hood's note found its right key, the hallway felt like someone had apologized to it and meant it. When a building has been nervous for a week and finally decides to trust its own breath again, the relief doesn't arrive like a cheer. It comes in small approvals, a door that shuts with one try, a clock whose second hand doesn't stumble at the 12, a hallway that returns your footsteps at the same volume you sent them. That Monday morning, after Nora handed over her key and Ms. Ray turned the hood off, North Lake Secondary began to feel that kind of better, the under-the-skin kind. The first step in a quiet fix is always paper. Ms. Ray wrote a memo that refused to gossip. She used the format the school favoured, blocky, sturdy, so the page would signal business without sharpening its teeth. Room 3B, safety status, fume-hood, sash cracked, replacement scheduled for Friday, hood off until pane is installed and certified. Eyewash, Monday, refill is now standing order, custodial captain to initial. Unofficial after-hours room use is paused, requests for weekend access go through the office. If you need the hood for demonstration or supervised prep, coordinate with metal shop, temporary ventilation, or postpone until certification. She taped the memo on the inside of 3B's door, where only adults would see it. On the hallway side, kids saw nothing new but their own reflections in the wired glass. She didn't want a sign to become the lesson. She wanted the lesson to be the behavior. Then she phoned Harbour Systems again and exchanged the two currencies that move parts faster than postage, the code number you can quote by heart, and the word student spoken like a contract. The man on the line, his name was Bill, had the phone voice of someone who spends days inside lists. He listened, made a rectangle of silence and said, "Friday morning, 2 men, pane and sash hardware. We'll bring the suction rig. You'll sign, I'll initial." He did not promise magic. He promised to show up with tools, which is better. Nora wrote her own message, this time in letters so clear they might as well have been carved. On the prep room whiteboard, below the week's list of reagent levels and glassware counts, she added, "Etching paused until hood certified." Names still happen, different path. Thank you. She underlined names once, not for style, but for loyalty. The word had been the kernel under the week's sand, the thing she had tried to protect with a rule-bending habit. Now she would protect it by daylight. No Sundays, no hum, pitched a hair too high, no bottle a thumb's width below a pencil tick. She slipped the small envelope with the copper strips into Ms. Ray's inbox and wrote, "Hold," across the flap. Not evidence. Just a reminder that a story had paused somewhere decent. Mr. Klein reopened class that day with the calm and honest teacher earns by being plain. He did not tell a ghost story, he did not hide the scare. He wheeled the overhead projector to the front and aligned the acetate like a person who respects straightness, and then used it to show 2 photographs, a cracked sash with tape and an eyewash bottle with a thick, black mark. He kept the caption short because short is how you get 14-year-olds to keep a sentence in their pocket. Tape is a warning, not permission. This line is a promise. He didn't say because a mistake happened. He said because we are a room. The kids absorbed that quickly, the way kids do when the adult in the front doesn't angle the light to flatter himself. A few glanced at the hood, now still and shy, and then looked back at their notebooks. Someone in the second row raised a hand and asked if the hood would be fixed or just working. Mr. Klein, who had known the difference his whole career, said, fixed, and the room accepted the phrase as if it belonged on the periodic table. The nurse, who had kept her ledger like a priest keeps a missal, added a tiny new practice that nobody but her would notice. She clipped a small red tab to the page for the week of the fire. Not to dramatize it, to find it later if a question landed that needed that week's pulse. She also placed a fresh roll of tape by the eyewash cradle in 3B, not to mark the fill line, Mr. Klein had that habit already, but to make notice easier the next time anyone's eyes were tired. Little courtesies help other people not miss their own promises. Peter did what night people do when a problem shifts away from them but could drift back. He wrote the weekend meter schedule on the back of his spiral pad, Sunday 20:30, 20:45, 21, and left 2 blank lines after each slot. He carried his pencil like a measuring tool. Habit, now that it had a job, would not have to pretend to be worry. The harbour systems men came on Friday, dry hair plastered to heads by Seattle weather that couldn't be bothered to change for anyone. They had the easy competence of tradespeople who don't over-explain. One whistled a tune that meant nothing. The other set the suction rig on the floor like a faithful dog and checked the cups with pinky fingers for seal. The cracked sash still wore light like a hair. The tape still said, "Low sash only." The fan behind it sat off, which put everyone in a better mood, because an idle machine looks less insulted when you remove a wounded part. They taped the work area like the room was a painting and they were protecting the edges. They released the old glass and lifted it with a tenderness that would have surprised anyone who thinks repair is all wrench and no grace. They didn't call the broken pane bad, they called it this piece, and they set it in a padded crate. When they slid the new glass into the tracks, it moved like a sentence falling into place at the end of a paragraph, soundless and obviously right. Bill initialed the work order Ms. Ray signed with the pen she saves for end of task. She wrote replaced 1174 on the maintenance ticket with a slanted hand and put the yellow copy into a folder that suddenly felt heavier in a good way, as if finished work had its own gravity. There is, after a fix, a temptation to go loud. Ms. Ray resisted it. She didn't make an announcement over the PA about safety. She didn't hold an assembly for lessons learned. She chose a more faithful ceremony. She walked to 3B alone just before 5th period, stood in the doorway, looked at the new pane. She put 2 fingers on the sash and felt the slide, firm, true. She let it stop where the tape asked. The hood hummed a note so correct it made her shoulders drop a 1/4 inch. She left without turning on any extra lights, the way you leave a room where a baby is finally asleep.